Chapter 131. Jiang Shui and Jiang Tian hurriedly walked through the northern part of the school. This was where the laboratories and research institutes gathered. They checked them one by one, but found nothing yet. "Sister, we can't keep searching like this." Jiang Tian frowned and said, "Why don't we ask the people in the laboratories to come out on their own?" Jiang Tian had a baby face and looked like a fresh graduate, but he had been a police officer for a few years. He knew that they did not have much time, and it was not convenient for most of them to enter the school. They could only rely on the two of them to search secretly. Jiang Shui had joined the police force a year earlier than him and had more experience. She shook her head and said, "No, we can't alert the enemy." She knew more about the inside story. This is not a simple mission. If we let the target escape, we might not have another chance. Jiang Tian could not help but be curious. "Sister, what mission is this? Captain didn't even tell me." Jiang Shui frowned slightly, but there was nothing to hide since the mission was right in front of her. She immediately said, "Have you heard of the Full Moon sect? That evil sect?" Jiang Tian immediately exclaimed. He knew the evil name of the Full Moon sect all too well. Jiang Shui nodded with a sullen face and did not say anything else. When Jiang Tian found out that this operation was actually related to the infamous evil sect, he immediately lost interest in asking more questions. The two of them moved even faster, but right at this moment, a heart-palpitating energy fluctuation came from not far in front of them. Within Tian Yuan's laboratory, 50 moon slaves were placed together in a narrow space. A red mist was slowly being released from them. Under the influence of the red mist, the moon slaves began to look fierce and their expressions cold. The ferocity in their hearts was completely stimulated. Roar! With a low roar, the moon slaves began a fight. The space provided for them to move was too small, so most of the moon slaves were squeezed together. Instead of fighting, it was more like a crazy bite. They used their teeth, claws, and any weapons that could hurt each other to kill their own kind. Tian Yuan watched coldly. When there were only half of the moon slaves left, he waved his hand indifferently. "Start pouring the spirit serum." The heroic spirit original fluid was the 7-colored spring water that was used to heal the injuries of heroic spirits. This kind of liquid had a strong recovery effect on heroic spirits. It was expensive and usually only used after diluting it. However, Tian Yuan was currently using an extremely high concentration of the liquid. The rainbow-colored viscous liquid began to seep into the small room from all sides and soon covered the entire room. The battle between the moon slaves became even more intense. Every time a wound appeared on their bodies, it would be quickly healed by the heroic spirit serum. The battle went on without end. Fresh blood flowed out continuously and mixed with the original liquid on the ground, forming a strange viscous liquid that reeked of blood. "Sister, hurry up. It's right in front." Jiang Tian took the lead and quickly rushed through the experimental area, quickly arriving in front of Tian Yuan's lab. He had already used the power of the heroic spirit, so his speed was astonishing. Jiang Shui's heroic spirit was not the speed type, so she could only follow behind while panting. Jiang Shui didn't have time to complain. She caught up with them, panting. "Quick, break the door down." Jiang Tian nodded heavily. He mobilized all the power of the heroic spirit and kicked the door of the lab hard. Boom! It hurts. The loud sound echoed in the experimental area. 3 seconds later, Jiang Tian hugged his leg and cried out in pain, but the door did not move at all. Jiang Shui's face darkened. She pushed him away and snorted angrily. "You're so useless. Watch me." Jiang Shui's heroic spirit was also a heroic spirit, but her level was obviously higher. When she attacked with all her strength, a shadow of a gray bear even appeared behind her. There seemed to be a bear's roar in the air, and the girl slammed her palm down. The sound was even more dull than before, but the door still did not move. Jiang Tian looked at everything in confusion. "This door is really sturdy." Jiang Shui silently retracted her hand and said casually, but Jiang Tian clearly saw that her right hand was shaking. At this moment, another 2 figures appeared in front of them. One was a young man in a gray suit, and the other was an old man with a long white beard. The two police officers didn't notice how they appeared at all, and they immediately became vigilant. Jiang Shui frowned and asked, "You two are?" The two ignored her. The old man said to himself, "Madam, this door was made with a secret technique. It's connected to the entire lab. Forcefully destroying it will destroy the lab as well." "I see," Jiang Tian exclaimed at the side, but his sister glared at him, and he didn't dare to say anything. However, the two police officers' hearts were heavy. It was fine if the door was sturdy, there would always be a way to break it down, but if it was connected to the lab, wouldn't destroying the entire laboratory give the people inside a chance to take advantage of the situation and escape? The young man's expression didn't change, and he said indifferently, "Go in and take a look." Hearing that, the two police officers looked at him at the same time, and their gazes were a little strange. Did this person understand the old man's words? "This door can't be broken down." The young man took a step sideways, walked to the side of the door, and directly punched the wall next to the door. Boom! A loud noise that was much louder than before was heard, and the outer wall of the lab collapsed from the impact, creating a big hole. When the two police officers reacted, the two figures had already disappeared. They didn't have time to think too much, and they quickly got up and rushed into the lab. What they saw next was the bloody scene in the small transparent room. The last moon slave's face was filled with excitement, and it was crazily gnawing on the heads of its own kind, not even sparing the brains. After devouring all of its own kind, the moon slave's skin gradually turned red, and its body also showed a strange bloody color. Jiang Tian, who had never seen such a scene, almost vomited. Jiang Shui's face also twitched slightly, but she still held it in and shouted, "Tian Yuan, stop the experiment immediately and surrender, or don't blame us for being rude." Tian Yuan, who was standing in the middle of the lab, smiled faintly and shook his head. Too late, bang. The transparent glass was directly smashed by the blood moon slave. It jumped out and immediately rushed toward the surrounding staff. One of them couldn't dodge in time, and his neck was bitten by the blood moon slave. His whole body fell limply to the ground. "Professor Tian, what's going on?" A researcher stood behind Tian Yuan and stared dumbfoundedly at this scene. This was completely different from what they had expected. Moon slaves are extremely pure, heroic spirits, and their individual differences are extremely small. They can even devour each other to carry out genetic evolution. Tian Yuan was like a victorious general, calmly explaining his battle results. "The devouring information that I've given them is not self-healing," but Tian Yuan dragged his tone, and his empty eyes fell on that person, as if there was no emotion. Chapter 132. Tian Yuan's voice was calm and cold. The laboratory seemed to have fallen into an eerie silence. Only his voice echoed in the air, and the moon slave's distinct chewing sounds could be heard. After it pounced on the staff member, it bit his neck and tore his scalp apart bit by bit before devouring his brain. Jiang Tian covered his mouth to suppress the discomfort in his stomach and was about to walk over when he saw this scene. He could not help but vomit. What was even more eerie was that after the staff member's brain was eaten, his body slowly stood up. Blue liquid began to seep out of the remaining half of his head and eventually formed a twisted and strange new head. It was the face of the moon slave. "Humans become moon slaves after being bitten," Jiang Shui said in disbelief. This had completely overturned her understanding. Humans were humans, and heroic spirits were heroic spirits. It was common knowledge that the two could not be intertwined. However, the scene before them had overturned this common sense. The moon slave contaminated his soul and turned him into a heroic spirit. His body is just a shell. What a genius idea. Gu Xiaoyue's voice was also filled with disbelief, but at the same time, she was completely amazed. Making heroic spirits contagious and spreading like a virus. If it was successful, it would be a huge storm that would affect the entire continent. This was a war between heroic spirits and humans. This was the turning point of the continent's civilization. When Gu Xiaoyue realized what this meant, it was as if a string in his heart had been plucked. Some kind of thoughts grew uncontrollably like weeds. Regardless of what the people around them were thinking, the moon slaves would not stop. In just a short period of time, the moon slaves had grown from 1 to 2, 2 to 4. In the blink of an eye, half of the laboratory had become their own kind. Professor Tian Yuan's assistant, stood behind him. He was just an ordinary researcher. Faced with such a bloody scene, his legs were already weak and he could not walk anymore. However, his mind was still clear and his train of thought was not interrupted. Professor Tian, what are the benefits of doing this? If the moon slaves conquer the continent, could you? He could not finish a sentence because a moon slave had jumped onto Tian Yuan's back. However, the moon slave had no intention of biting him. After sniffing Tian Yuan's scent, it suddenly leaped from his shoulder onto the assistant's body and bit him viciously. Everything happened too quickly. Only when he felt the sharp pain on his neck did the deputy's pupils shrink, and he stared at Tian Yuan. "You're a heroic spirit." Only then did Tian Yuan burst into laughter. The power around his body began to boil, and an indescribable fluctuation was produced from his body. It was extremely similar to that of the moon slaves. Affected by this wave of energy, the moon slaves who were running around all over the place knelt down on one knee and worshipped Tian Yuan. Jiang Shue's expression changed slightly, and she blurted out, "The full moon sect. No wonder the full moon sect has always been elusive, and I couldn't find any trace of them. They're all moon slaves." If the members of the full moon sect were all moon slaves, then they would not be able to find them using the same method they used to find humans. What made her even more pale was that if her guess was correct, it meant that the moon slaves in front of her were not the first batch of moon slaves. There were countless of such mutated monsters lurking around the continent. As if to verify her guess, Tian Yuan slowly walked down from the high place, with a victorious smile on his face. "Ever since I woke up from my deep sleep 15 years ago, I've been waiting for this day." The smile on his face was slightly deranged. "You two little policemen, did you really think that I didn't know you were here?" Tian Yuan snorted coldly. "To tell you the truth, your chief superintendent has long known of my existence. However, before my children are completely destroyed, no one dares to kill me. Once they lose my control..." Halfway through his bold words, Professor Tian suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest. The pitch-black longsword had completely sunk into his chest. Gunan's expressionless face was displayed in front of him, and Tian Yuan was dumbfounded. You dare to kill me?" When he said this, his tone was no different from Gu Zhaoyue and the others who had seen the moon slaves. "Aren't you afraid of chaos?" Tian Yuan had painstakingly worked hard for 15 years, and it was not that he had never encountered a dead end. However, his enemies were always cautious and did not dare to force him into a dead end. This was his greatest reliance. Only Gu Nin did not care. The deaths of the people in the Morning Star realm had nothing to do with him. Gu Nin knew that the sword that pierced through the heart could not kill Tian Yuan, who had the body of a heroic spirit. Hence, the shadow sword glowed with black light, and shadow force gushed out wildly. To Tian Yuan, this kind of extremely high-level law power was the real fatal injury. Tian Yuan roared in anger, trying to break free from Gunan's grasp. However, his physical strength was still too weak, and he was almost instantly drowned by the shadow force. Tian Yuan's vision started to turn black, and his thoughts were also blocked. However, he heard a light question by his ear. "Do you know about the son of moon slaves?" Tian Yuan did not react at all, and answered subconsciously, "A living person who is corrupted by moon slaves and can maintain their intelligence is the son of moon slaves. Thank you." Gunan nodded and thanked him seriously. Then, the shadow force exploded and completely destroyed Tian Yuan's life. The moment Tian Yuan's aura completely disappeared, the laboratory seemed to be quiet for a moment, and then it was completely chaotic. Some of the blood-red moon slaves seemed to have gone mad, madly rushing towards Gunan, while others ran away without a care for their lives. In the blink of an eye, they disappeared without a trace, and Jiang Shui and her brother could not even stop them. The moon slaves that pounced towards Gu Nin were naturally sliced in half, and no one could catch up to those that ran away. After a while, the laboratory returned to silence. Jiang Shui, however, rushed in front of Gu Nan with a face full of anger and asked, "Do you know what you're doing? There are at least 32 cities on the continent, and moon slaves of the full moon sect are hiding there. If they start a riot, can you bear the responsibility?" Gu Nan did not even look at her. He was busy checking Tian Yuan's belongings. Searching corpses was a good habit, and he did find something valuable. It was Tian Yuan's experiment notes. Gu Zhaoyue, who was next to him, coughed softly and said, "Officer, Tian Yuan's plan has obviously been completed. Even if we don't kill him, he will still order us to kill him. You can still arrest him. You can do it." Jiang Shui roared at Gu Nan. You are the sinners of the entire continent." Gu Nan, who was squatting on the ground, had just stood up and was surprised by the female officer's anger. The next moment, Gu Nan scratched his head in confusion and then casually swung his sword. Chapter 133. Tian Yuan's lab was no longer lacking in blood, and Jiang Shui's body that was cut in half did not add much color to the place. You. Jiang Tian stared at Gu Nan in a daze. Then his eyes turned red. "I'll kill you." With a flash of the sword, Officer Jiang Tian followed in his sister's footsteps. Gu Nan casually swatted away 2 flies and said to Gu Zhaoyue, who was beside him, "Let's go." "Sir, where are we going next?" Gu Zhaoyue moved closer to Gu Nan, trying to please him. "It's time to set up a camp for survivors. We need living humans to experiment on the children of moon slaves." Gu Nan said, then muttered to himself, "I didn't expect this to be an apocalyptic zombie dungeon. Oh, right, we need to make this continent fall into chaos first." The capital's number 4 high school was in chaos. After the mutated moon slaves escaped from the lab, they were like viruses that had entered a human's body, obtaining sufficient nutrients and began to spread wildly. Every human that was bitten to death would become a new moon slave and participate in the contagion. Fortunately, the contagious nature of the moon slaves could not affect the existing heroic spirits. Otherwise, the chaos would be even more serious. However, considering that it was happening in 32 major cities on the continent at the same time, the severity of the incident was quite terrifying. "Sister, let's go." The moon demon pulled Lin Duo's hand and urged her. Okay. What the hell is that?" Lin Duo did not have any objections now that most of the people were running away, but she was also quite curious about the terrifying monster behind them. "That's a moon slave." A cold voice sounded. It was the sun demon. Lin Duo looked at him in surprise. Her expression seemed to say, "So you're not a mute." The sun demon only shook his head coolly in response. The moon demon interrupted their conversation. "Let's go, or it'll be too late." As if to confirm her words, a moon slave suddenly pounced over. However, the moon demon raised her leg and kicked it, sending it flying to the side. Lin Duo gulped and said quickly, "Let's go." In the imperial capital's government hall, the empire's president slammed his palm on the table and roared at the people below. A shocking incident happened on the Martyr's Palace yesterday, and today, more than 30 cities are on alert at the same time, including the imperial capital. Who can tell me what these monsters are? The president's anger was conveyed very well. Someone in the lower seats hurriedly stood up and said, "Your Excellency, according to the analysis of the relevant experts, that should be a type of ancient heroic spirit, moon slave." "Do you think I've never seen moon slave before?" The veins on the president's forehead bulged, and he asked with a cold expression, "Since when will a moon slave attack someone and turn them into a moon slave?" In ancient times, moon slaves were a very common type of heroic spirit. At most, there weren't many of them, and they didn't have the special characteristics they had today. In fact, regardless of whether it was the irrational aggression or the contagion, it was all given to them by Tian Yuan. In a sense, the moon slave that had appeared in the modern realm was a different kind of heroic spirit. The official who stood up couldn't help but wipe his sweat. The incident happened too suddenly, and they indeed didn't have enough time to gather more information. Seeing that the official couldn't say anything, the president could only say with a cold expression, "Continue to investigate the cause of the monster's appearance." But the most important thing right now is to organize emergency evacuation for the people and summon heroic spirits to kill those monsters. As the leader of a country, the president naturally wasn't a useless person. He made the most correct decision. No matter why the monsters appeared, the government couldn't panic at this time. As long as the monsters didn't attack the ordinary people, their numbers couldn't increase, and they would be killed off sooner or later. As the president's orders were issued one by one, the people in the meeting continued to write, and the relevant policies were quickly decided. All right, the president let out a light breath. Everyone, act according to this temporary plan and control the situation first. Why are you all looking at me like that? Halfway through his words, he saw that everyone was looking behind him as if they had seen a ghost. He suddenly felt a chill in his heart and subconsciously turned around, only to see a pitch-black figure standing behind him with a long sword in his hand. The president himself wasn't a powerhouse, so he didn't even have a chance to react before he was beheaded with a sword. The moment his head fell to the ground, he once again saw the entire meeting, but what he saw was this. Behind the 20 people in the meeting, there was a black figure standing, and even their actions were the same. It's all over. This was the president's last thought. The government's higher-ups were beheaded at the same time. This was enough to make the empire's government fall into complete chaos, and they wouldn't be able to resist the upcoming crisis. After doing all this, Gunan acted as if nothing had happened, and before the powerhouses of the government arrived, he dispersed all the shadow bodies. Near the capital's number 4 high school, Gunan and Gu Zhaoyue were standing on the top of a tall building, looking down at the chaos and killing below. The sudden scene of the apocalypse was the best way to show the naked nature of people. Greed, brutality, killing, the darkest side of human nature was revealed in just a few hours. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Gunan. He didn't care who had humanity and who didn't. He was only there to watch Lin Duo's whereabouts. In such a chaotic situation, Gunan didn't want anything to happen to Lin Duo, and if he was forced to end his reincarnation, it would be a complete loss. On the other hand, he didn't want to expose his existence, so he only sent the shadow bodies to follow them in secret, while he himself watched from above. Gu Zhaoyue looked into the distance at the chaos coming from the direction of the government, and she faintly realized what Gunan had been doing. "Sir, the government." Gunan nodded and said, "The moon slaves are very contagious, but they're too weak, and we can't let the humans fight them in an organized manner." The mutated moon slaves were at most at the peak of the acquired realm, and in this world they couldn't even be considered the second level. At this level, once the human powerhouses reacted, the moon slaves would be quickly surrounded and annihilated. Gunan wanted to create artificial moon slaves, so of course he couldn't just watch as the moon slaves were killed. Therefore, he destroyed the upper echelons of the humans. As long as the government fell into chaos and bought some time for the moon slaves, it would be enough for them to mutate and strengthen themselves. The scene of 50 normal moon slaves devouring each other to gather energy was still fresh in Gunan's mind. Gu Zhaoyue was silent for a long time. He roughly understood what Gunan had done, but he still couldn't figure out his purpose. In this world, was there really such a thing as an antisocial personality? However, he definitely didn't dare to ask too much. For a person as temperamental as Gunan, he might just kill him for talking too much. The imperial capital won't be in chaos for too long. I'll clean up the upper echelons of the military. Gunan said calmly. In half a month, I want to see a camp with more than 2,000 people. Chapter 134. The moon slaves descended, and the world descended into chaos. Due to Professor Tian Yuan's efforts, the moon slaves struck the capital and 32 cities at the same time, catching the people of the heroic spirit continent off guard. The mutated moon slaves possessed characteristics unimaginable to ordinary people. They had no intelligence and were not afraid of death. They were heroic spirits and were difficult to destroy. They had the ability to infect humans, and this ability was constantly being strengthened. In the blink of an eye, it had been almost 20 days since the apocalypse. Due to a certain person's outstanding contributions, the government of the heroic spirit continent could not come up with any effective response when the apocalypse first arrived. By the time the upper echelons of the humans recovered from their shock, all communications had been destroyed by the moon slaves, and they could only fight on their own. In a human camp at the center of the capital, there was a completely sealed laboratory at the center of the camp. The laboratory was completely silent, but if someone put their ear to the wall, they would be able to faintly hear the faint cries of pain coming from inside. It was the screams of a human. The sound was intermittent, and it sounded incomparably terrifying. Gunan stood expressionlessly in the middle of the lab. A man was tied up in front of him, watching as a moon slave was released and chewed on the man's head. During this process, the man was injected with psychotropic drugs to ensure that he remained conscious throughout the entire process. After a series of screams, the man was turned into a moon slave and was beheaded by Gunan. It still doesn't work. What's the problem? The corpse in front of Gunan slowly collapsed, but his brows were tightly furrowed, and he did not relax at all. According to Tian Yuan, the children of moon slaves were humans who retained their intelligence after being infected. However, it sounded simple, but it was very difficult to do. In the beginning, moon slaves had to eat all the brains of humans to be able to infect their souls. However, in just half a month, the moon slave's ability to infect had greatly increased. Even a normal scratch could cause a human to mutate. Even so, humans will still die the moment they are turned into moon slaves. Gunan rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. In just half a month, he had done at least 100 experiments, but none of them were successful. Every time, the test subjects would completely lose consciousness before they were contaminated. When they woke up, they had already become mindless moon slaves. Faced with such a situation, Gunan did not have anyone to ask. Through the notes left behind by Tian Yuan, he was probably the person who understood the mutated moon slaves the best in the world. Compared to the normal moon slaves of ancient times, the biggest characteristic of the mutated moon slaves was their ability to pollute and their lack of intelligence. According to Tian Yuan, it was the corruption ability of the mutated moon slaves that caused them to lose their rationality and turn them into monsters that only knew how to kill. According to Tian Yuan's original plan, he could use his advantage as a member of the same race to control the irrational mutated moon slaves. His original plan was to instigate a war between the humans and the heroic spirits to achieve his goal of controlling the continent. However, no one would have thought that Professor Tian would die before he could succeed. He fell to Gunan's hands first, which led to a huge upheaval in the mainland. From this perspective, it would not be an exaggeration to say that Gunan had single-handedly caused the apocalypse. Even Tian Yuan had never thought of causing a riot among the moon slaves, because they were of no value to him. Only Gunan needed the apocalypse to happen. That way, even if his experiment was not successful, there would be a large number of samples outside. Sooner or later, the children of moon slaves would appear. An intelligent being awakened among the countless moon slaves and led the moon slaves to attack the humans. Gunan's lips curled into a faint smile. In the center of the imperial city, Lin Duo dragged her tired body and slowly walked into the camp. This was her original high school. Now it was called the Glory Camp. It was one of the largest survivor camps in the imperial city. Your Excellency Lin Duo, welcome back. The night watchman who was guarding the camp quickly bowed when he saw Lin Duo. Lin Duo smiled and nodded at him. Then, she entered the camp, leaving behind a commotion behind her. Hey, did you see that? Your Excellency Lin Duo smiled at me. Nonsense. She was obviously smiling at me. Hearing such discussions, Lin Duo's footsteps did not stop as she walked forward. She could not help but smile, but she quickly hid it. Although it had only been half a month since the apocalypse, the atmosphere where strength was the most important and the strong were respected had penetrated into every corner of life. Only those with power would be able to obtain more food, resources, better living conditions, and the respect of others. As for those who were not strong enough, they might even be able to take their own lives at will. Lin Duo did not have a deep understanding of this atmosphere, but she enjoyed the respectful gazes of others. She was proud to fight to protect the weak. However, She knew very well that the reason why she was treated like this was all because of the two little guys, the two twin heroic spirits, Sun and Moon Fiend, displayed combat power that was not inferior to the third stage in the battle against the Moon Slaves. As her heroic spirit, this combat strength was naturally counted as her own. "Sister, I'm back." Lin Duo walked in her home in the camp. It was a room that was converted from a high school dormitory. Lin poked her head out and looked at her sister's tired face. She chuckled and said, "Go get ready. There will be chicken soup tonight." Wow! The expert student Lin Duo immediately lost her image and cried out in surprise. Now was not the time before the apocalypse. Meat that seemed ordinary at that time was now extremely precious. Even with Lin Duo's treatment in the camp, she had not tasted meat for a few days. After a while, Lin came out with hot chicken soup and said, "I heard that the camp scouting team found a chicken farm that was not polluted, but it's all thanks to you that we can get 2 whole chickens." Lin put down the chicken soup and patted Lin Duo's head. "No, it's all thanks to Xiao Ming and Xiao Yu," Lin Duo said embarrassedly. Behind her, the figures of the Sun and Moon Fiends also appeared. After being together for a long time, Lin Duo had already given them names. They were originally called Xiao Ri and Xiao Yu, but the former was too strange, so she changed it to Xiao Ming. "Xiao Ming, do you want some chicken soup?" Lin Duo did not forget her little friend while she was eating. The Sun Fiend rolled his eyes and did not say anything. The Moon Fiend covered his mouth and laughed. "Stupid sister, we have no taste when we eat." Heroic spirits did not have taste buds. Chapter 135. Tian. Lin Duo, who was still holding a chicken leg in her hand, seemed a little surprised and a little surprised. When the apocalypse came, many relatives and friends were completely lost. For example, the parents of Lin Duo and her sister never appeared again. But in such a situation, no one had the energy to pay attention to this. Everyone could only think about how to survive tomorrow. Under such circumstances, Lin Duo was indeed very surprised to hear news of Tian again. Tian was her best classmate and best friend when she was in school. Knowing that she was still alive was more important than anything else. Lin nodded. "She came here about once in 3 days. I wasn't there that day. She only met me today." "How is Tian?" Lin Duo asked hurriedly. Looking at her, "She's not good." Lin Ku recalled Tian's appearance during the day inside. "By the way, she said that if she didn't come to you in 3 days, she would ask you to help her find a place." In the central laboratory, Gunan held a girl in one hand and looked down at her. This was Lin Duo's best friend, Tian. The fear in Tian's heart was difficult to suppress. She didn't expect to meet Gunan here. "Isn't he Lin Duo's spirit? How could—" "You said you're Tian Yuan's daughter?" Gunan said with great interest. "Little girl, I have to tell you with regret, your father is a spirit." "You're lying." Tian stared at Gunan angrily and said loudly, "My father has been a federal professor for more than 10 years. How could he be a spirit?" Gunan shook his head gently, threw her down, and waved his sword to kill her. He originally wanted to see if Tian knew anything, but now it seemed that she was probably just an adopted daughter of Tian Yuan. Nothing more. Wait, why did Tian Yuan adopt a daughter? Gunan's movements suddenly stopped. His mind seemed to be electrified as a certain idea suddenly came to him. His eyes couldn't help but fall on the little girl's face. Tian was startled by his eyes. That kind of fiery gaze was like staring at prey. It wasn't something a little girl like her could withstand. At this time, Gu Xiaoyue happened to walk into the laboratory. She was shocked to see Tian sitting on the ground. "Damn it, I clearly issued a ban." Gunan waved his hand to stop him from continuing. Tian was able to enter here by relying on some secret door, most likely left behind by Tian Yuan in the past. She might have found Tian Yuan's old notes, which was why she came to this laboratory. Gunan knocked Tian out and asked, "What's the matter?" Gu Xiaoyue hurriedly bowed and said, "Sir, the other 2 camps hope to join forces with us. They hope that the leaders of the 3 camps can meet. For this kind of thing, you can handle it yourself," Gunan said impatiently. He knew why Gu Xiaoyue asked this question. Of the three largest camps in the capital, apart from the Star Moon that Gu Zhaoyue had established, the other two branches were the Glory Camp and the Brave Camp. It could be said that these three camps controlled more than 80% of the resources in the imperial capital. This kind of control naturally corresponded to a shocking amount of authority. Gunan could generously delegate power to Gu Zhaoyue, but Gu Zhaoyue did not dare to treat himself as the boss. He clearly knew that power was the root of everything, and the power of the person in front of him was enough to easily destroy him. Yes, there's one more thing. After receiving Gunan's reply, Gu Zhaoyue continued, "It's news from Glory. A gathering place for moon slaves has appeared in West City. This time, the leaders of the three camps are also meeting to discuss this matter." "Oh, moon slaves gather naturally?" Gunan raised his eyebrows slightly. He was very interested in this point. "I'm not sure yet. I only know that it's very dangerous, and the people of Glory have never returned," Gu Zhaoyue reported truthfully. Gunan nodded lightly. This was what he had instructed them to pay attention to. His target was the intelligent moon slaves, and if such moon slaves appeared, it would definitely cause abnormal changes in the moon slave community. "I understand. You can go now." Gunan casually threw Tian to him and said, "Take care of this little girl. Don't let her die." He paused for a moment, then said, "I'll be there for the meeting of the three camps." "Understood." Gu Zhaoyue's face showed some excitement. The leaders of the other two camps were both stronger than him, and it was good for him that they could persuade Gu Nan to intervene. Gu Zhaoyue's figure quickly disappeared, and Gunan finally showed some excitement. After half a month without any progress, even though Gu Nan could still control his emotions, he still felt a little annoyed. However, he had to do the quest. Gunan knew very well that the quest was his foundation. The astral realm could only provide him with sim points, but not points. If he wanted to improve his strength, he could not do without sim points and points. Now, there was finally a turning point. Whether Tian was a special existence or not still needed to be tested, and there might be something strange in West City. Lin Duo's home. After listening to her sister's description, she also realized what place Tian was talking about. The place she mentioned should be the forbidden area in the center of the camp, right? Lin Duo bit her finger and said doubtfully, "Mr. Gu said that we must not enter." Lin Ku also nodded, "I don't know what's inside." Speaking of which, Mr. Gu's ban is really strange. The two sisters had entered the camp relatively early. However, the laboratory seemed to have been there since the camp was built, and no one had entered it, except Mr. Gu himself. To their surprise, Sun Demon Xiao Ming suddenly said, "There's something wrong with that Gu guy." Lin Duo could not help but roll her eyes at him. "Xiao Ming, even if Mr. Gu's order is a little strange, he did not force us to do anything." "How can you say that?" Xiao Ming frowned, but did not say anything in the end. The Moon Demon added, "My brother and I have secretly approached that place, and there is a very strong aura of moon slaves. We suspect that there's a group of moon slaves in there." "What did you say?" Lin Duo and her sister immediately exclaimed. If there were moon slaves in the center of the human camp, it was a joke with the lives of thousands of people. "Impossible." Lin Ku immediately shook her head. "Mr. Gu would never do such a thing. What's in it for him?" Currently, there was nothing useful about moon slaves, so it was meaningless to keep them in captivity. "She's wrong," Xiao Ming interrupted. Little Ming interrupted. His cold tone and calm demeanor made the two sisters feel a little more hopeful. "I'm the elder brother," he said seriously. "Don't care about this at a time like this." Lin Duo angrily slammed the table. After a while, the atmosphere in the room finally became serious again. Lin Ku frowned. If what Xiao Ming and Xiao Yu sensed is true, then we need to investigate what's in that laboratory. "But how?" Lin Duo pouted. "Mr. Gu won't let anyone in unless he has something to do and leaves the camp." Lin Ku said helplessly, "Yes, but even if he leaves, he won't let anyone know." However, at this time, there was a knock on the door, and a man's voice came from outside. "Your Excellency Lin Duo, Mr. Gu asked me to inform you." Lin Duo and her sister looked at each other. then opened the door and asked, "What is it?" Chapter 136. Early in the morning, the dim light shone on the damp ground of the Star Moon camp, bringing a rare sense of tranquility to the chaotic world. Lin Duo walked out of the house and turned around hesitantly. "Sister, are you really not coming with us?" After receiving Mr. Gu's invitation yesterday, Lin Duo agreed to go with them without any hesitation. After all, compared to the guesses of the Sun Demon and the Moon Demon, Gu Xiaoyue's reputation in the camp was real. "Of course. Have you forgotten that I'm a possession-type heroic spiritualist?" Lin Ke said helplessly. In the original continent, possession-type heroic spiritualists were the most popular as they could fully unleash the heroic spiritualist's battle awareness. Most of the top heroic spiritualists were possession-type heroic spiritualists. However, in the apocalypse, the status of possession-type heroic spiritualists plummeted. The reason was simple. Moon slaves were too polluting. Once they were injured in battle, they could be polluted and turn into moon slaves. This made heroic spiritualists reluctant to engage in close combat. On the contrary, summoning-type heroic spiritualists could control more heroic spirits, so they became the main force against moon slaves. Heroic spirits would not be polluted. Even if some of them did not have high battle intelligence, they were more than enough to deal with moon slaves. Therefore, possession-type heroic spiritualists like Lin Ke were mostly responsible for logistics and teaching. They would not go out easily. Lin Duo could only nod helplessly. She could not help but say, "Sister, don't sneak into that laboratory." After yesterday, Lin Duo and the others were quite curious about the central laboratory. However, Mr. Gu's invitation came first, so she could only put it aside for now. "All right." Lin Ke pushed her sister forward. "Do I need you to teach me? I won't do such a dangerous thing." Lin Duo could only leave. She only revealed a bright smile when her sister's figure completely disappeared. "If I don't go, can I find someone else to go?" Outside the Star Moon camp, when Lin Duo arrived at the meeting point, there were already many people there. The mission this time was not only a meeting between the three camps, but it was also to investigate the strange gathering of moon slaves in West City. Lin Duo had already heard about this. Moon slaves were the enemies of all humans. Since they were gathering, it was obvious that they had to investigate it thoroughly. Otherwise, it would be too late. "Hey, Lin Duo, I didn't expect to see you here." A blue-haired young man saw Lin Duo's arrival and greeted her in surprise. "Senior Zhang." Lin Duo was also very surprised. "Are you also in the camp? I've never seen you before." Senior Zhang smiled and said, "I only escaped the encirclement 2 days ago. Fortunately, Mr. Gu took me in. Otherwise, I would have nowhere to go." The so-called encirclement referred to the areas in the city that were occupied by the moon slaves. It would be extremely difficult to break out from there. As for this Senior Zhang, he used to be Lin Duo's classmate, so he was also acquainted with Lin Duo. From encirclement? So powerful. Lin Duo looked at him with admiration in her eyes. Lin Duo and Gu Xiaoyue started chatting, while Gunan and Gu Xiaoyue stood in a hidden place. "Sir, Lin Duo has already joined the team." Gu Xiaoyue's voice was slightly low, and there was a hint of hidden curiosity in it. This girl, Lin Duo, was only brought into the camp after Gu Nin personally reminded her. He did not know her before this. This time, Gunan wanted to bring Lin Duo. This made Gu Xiaoyue curious. What was the relationship between Gunan and this girl? Gunan only nodded indifferently and did not say much. The reason he wanted to bring Lin Duo was very simple. Only by keeping Lin Duo under his watch could he guarantee her safety. Gunan did not trust anyone else. Seeing this, Gu Xiaoyue could not help but feel puzzled. That person is called Zhang Ying. He was originally a famous genius, heroic spiritualist in the capital. He only joined the camp after escaping from the encirclement 2 days ago. He has 3 heroic spirits with extraordinary combat strength. Although he's young, his strength is already close to the 3rd stage. As she said this, Gu Xiaoyue lowered her eyes, but she was secretly sizing up Gu Nan from the corner of her eyes. She really wanted to see what expression Gu Nan had on his face so that she could make some judgments. Unfortunately, Gu Nan did not have any expression at all. It was as if he was looking at two strangers. Is it not what I think it is? Gu Zhaoyue was puzzled. The meeting place of the three camp leaders was not far from their respective camps. They could arrive in a few hours. If it was too far, no one would dare to bring a large team. Star Moon Camp's team only had about 10 people, but most of them were between the second and third stage. They could be called an elite team. Under Gu Zhaoyue's lead, they quickly arrived at the predetermined location. The teams from the other two camps also arrived at about the same time. The leaders of Glory and Brave Hearts were a man and a woman. When they saw that Gu Zhaoyue was leading the team alone, they could not help but frown. The man was the leader of Glory Camp, Zhu Long, while the woman was the founder of Brave Hearts. She had never revealed her real name and called herself Caillou to others. When the team gathered, they came to greet them. Mr. Gu, that person. The main purpose of this meeting was to meet the person behind Star Moon Camp. Otherwise, they would not have bothered to meet Gu Zhaoyue, since they knew her. However, Gu Zhaoyue only smiled and said, "There's no need to be anxious. The Lord is already here." The man and woman looked at each other and looked around in puzzlement. They had already spread out their perception, but they still did not discover anything unusual. Just when they could not hold back their curiosity and were about to continue asking questions, a voice came from behind them. "Let's talk over there." The two of them suddenly turned around, but the person behind them was shocked. It was a member of Glory Camp. Zhu Long frowned and asked, "Gao Xian, did you see anyone talking just now?" "No." The member named Gao Xian shook his head blankly. His expression did not seem to be fake, and there was no need for him to be fake. That was why the two leaders felt a chill in their hearts. Even their bodies felt cold. The next moment, something that made them dumbfounded happened. A pitch-black silhouette slowly stood up from the shadows of the two people and made a pleased gesture. This black figure had no facial features at all. It was more like a human figure wrapped in shadows. It was precisely because of this that it was even more terrifying. "You too, please." Gu Zhaoyue seemed to be used to this scene and said with a faint smile. Chapter 137. Zhu Long and Caillou followed the black silhouette into the distance. "You wanted to see me?" The black silhouette turned around, his body gradually taking on a normal human form. If they had not seen him stand up from the shadows with their own eyes, Zhu Long and Caillou would not have thought there was anything wrong with him. They looked at each other and said at the same time, "I've heard a lot about you." Gunan looked at them doubtfully. "Do you know my name?" Ever since Gunan came to the Morning Star plane, he had only mentioned his name to Lin, not even Gu Zhaoyue. If these two knew, they would have to reconsider. It seemed like they were just being polite. Seeing this, Zhu Long nodded at Caillou and said, "Since that's the case, let us introduce ourselves. Zhu Long, captain of the 1st Special Forces of the Federation." Caillou spoke up at the same time, Fong Caillou, director of the Federation's Special Forces. "So your surname, Zhao?" Gunan was expressionless. The two were dumbfounded by this term, but Zhu Long still spoke with a straight face. When the apocalypse arrived, the federal government was in chaos, leading to the current situation. Now that the Federal Command Center has been reestablished, I hope you can accept the country's command. Fong Caillou added, "Maintaining the country's stability is the duty of every citizen. Of course, as long as Star Moon Camp accepts the country's command, the military will definitely not mistreat you too." Before Gu Nan could speak, Gu Zhaoyue was already amused. "I painstakingly built this camp, and you want to take it away with just a word?" If he had known this was their goal, Gu Zhaoyue would not have come. He was even rejoicing that he had brought many people with him, or else if the two sides fell out. As if seeing through Gu Zhaoyue's thoughts, Fong Caillou revealed a meaningful smile. At the gathering point of the three camps, there were a few people standing among the people of Star Moon Camp, constantly proclaiming something. The person in the lead was Gao Xian, who had been standing behind Zhu Long. "Everyone from Star Moon Camp, the disaster of the moon slaves won't last long. When the apocalypse ends, have you thought of a way out?" Gao Xian said to the people of Star Moon Camp. "Brother Gao is right. The moon slaves are generally not that strong. When the federal government is free to deal with them, it will not be difficult for them to be dealt with." "That's right. Other than their large numbers and contagious nature, moon slaves don't pose any other threat. They seemed to be chatting casually, but they discussed moon slaves' weaknesses one after another, as if they were certain that the apocalypse would not last for too long, and that peace would soon arrive. This argument was also quite popular. After all, humans were always more accepting of optimistic predictions, and not many people liked the current apocalypse. At the very least, Zhang Ying seemed to be very motivated. Not only did he quickly become friends with Gao Xian and the others, he even persuaded the people of Star Moon Camp. His first target was naturally Lin Duo, whom he had known for a long time. Lin Duo, you also think that the apocalypse won't last long, right? If only the government could stand up now, I would definitely respond to the call. That's right. Lin Duo nodded subconsciously. She felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't tell what it was. Zhang Ying added, moreover, a warm-hearted person like Mr. Gu would definitely think the same way. What do you think? Lin Duo tilted her head and thought for a while, but in the end, she could only agree with him. At this moment, another figure walked over from the two camps. Lin Duo felt that his appearance was very familiar, as if she had seen him on TV before. Fellow heroic spiritualists of Star Moon Camp, many of you might recognize me. I'm the former mayor of Capital City. My name is... A commotion came from the camp, and Gu Xiaoyue frowned as he looked over there. With his hearing, he could still hear most of the words. Government, mayor, retreat. He didn't need to think too much. Just these few keywords were enough for him to guess what the other party had done. You. The old man was so angry that his nose almost became crooked. He didn't expect that the other party would try to poach someone from under his nose. However, they were doing things in the name of the government, which was definitely attractive to the people of the camp. Zhu Long's tanned face showed some apologetic expression. He saluted and said, I'm sorry, Mr. Gu. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures, and this concerns the national interest. Chi. The strange sound of a sword entering a body interrupted his words. Zhu Long turned his head in shock, but what he saw was Gu Nan's expressionless face. The pitch-black sword lightly rose, and the weak body of the summoner-type heroic spiritualist was like a piece of paper in front of Gu Nan. It was instantly cut in half. Bastard. Fong Caiyue's expression changed. Her body suddenly became bigger, and a green aura appeared on her body. She was an extremely rare possession-type heroic spiritualist, but she wasn't afraid of being contaminated by moon slaves. This was because her possession-type heroic spirit was an even rarer type. Elemental life form, wind elemental. Fong Caiyue's face began to distort. Her body turned into a green ripple, and her entire body quickly elementalized. Then, she slapped her palm down on Gu Nan. Without hesitation, Gu Nan slapped out even faster. A terrifying shadow power surged out and completely suppressed the wind elemental. If it was a real elemental life form, it wouldn't be so easy. However, this kind of possession-type heroic spiritualist law level was too low. Facing Gu Nan's peak rank 3 shadow power, she could only be crushed. Fong Caiyue was immediately beaten back to her original form. She spat out a mouthful of blood, and her entire body flew out, landing among the people in the camp on the other side. The people who were in a heated discussion were shocked by this scene. When they saw who landed, they were even more shocked. Sister Caiyue. Big sister. What happened to you, big sister? On the other side, Gu Nan and Gu Xiaoyue's figures slowly walked over. The black sword in Gu Nan's hand was still stained with blood. It was obvious who did it. One person's eyes were bloodshot, and he charged forward to fight with Gu Nan. You dare to hurt our big sister. Unfortunately, he didn't have the chance to finish his sentence. He was directly cut in half by Gu Nan's sword. Kill them all. Don't let a single one escape. Gu Nan said to Gu Xiaoyue, when things are over here, take in their survivors. Yes. Gu Xiaoyue had been tricked by Zhu Long and Gu Xiaoyue. She was holding back her anger, waiting for a chance to attack. He casually killed a person with a palm, and then shouted, kill them all. The people in the two camps suddenly lost their commander. They were caught unprepared. Even if Star Moon Camp's overall strength was slightly weaker, Gu Zhaoyue was still here. They could definitely win this battle. Wait! A loud roar came from the crowd. A slightly bald middle-aged man walked over. His expression was serious, and his eyes were almost burning. It was the mayor of the capital city. Glory Camp and Bravehearts Camp are protected areas recognized by the federal government. They are the government's army. The mayor was indignant. What do you want to do? You are committing a crime. You are committing treason. The people in Star Moon Camp couldn't help but stop for a moment. It had only been less than a month since the apocalypse broke out. The federal government's authority was still deeply rooted in the people's hearts. Moreover, the discussion and persuasion of the two camps were not completely useless. Seeing this, the mayor was slightly relieved. He knew that as long as he could persuade most of the people, he would win. No one could go against the group. He turned to look at Gu Nan and said with a sullen expression, "Sir, I don't care who you are. Your actions are already f***ed." Chapter 138. The capital's mayor died with his eyes wide open. Gu Nan's swordsmanship wasn't very good. In fact, he didn't know any swordsmanship. He could only rely on pure speed. But most of the time, speed was enough. The mayor was pierced by a sword. He wasn't even a heroic spiritualist. His life was instantly cut off. He turned into a corpse that slowly slid down. Gu Nan didn't say a word. The shadow bodies started to appear around, killing the people from the two camps one by one. Since the people from Star Moon Camp didn't make a move, he would do it himself. Gu Nan never used words to force people to do things. He was used to using his fists. Fang Kai-Wei was still breathing. She struggled to get up from the ground, coldly staring at Gu Nan. She was also a soldier. Her personality was firm to the point of coldness. That's why she was the commander of the Special Operations Division. No one can go against the country. You can destroy our bodies, but you can never defeat our will, Fang Kai-Wei said with a powerful voice. Gu Nan shrugged and responded to her with a single strike of his sword. He wasn't interested in the will of the NPC. Destroying other people's bodies was enough. The massacre continued. Gu Zhaoyue originally wanted to join in, but Gu Nan's actions were too fast, or the shadow body's efficiency was too high. In just a few breaths, more than 10 bodies were thrown down. The shadow bodies had finished harvesting and turned back into shadows. Mr. Gu Nan, Lin Duo looked at Gu Nan's familiar and expressionless face in front of her in disbelief. Ever since Gu Nan left that day, he hadn't appeared again. If it wasn't for the heroic spirit contract, she would have thought that Gu Nan also died in the apocalypse. But even after confirming that he was still alive, Lin Duo tried to summon Gu Nan countless times, without exception. It had never occurred to her that she would meet Mr. Gu Nan again under such circumstances. Lin Duo wanted to go forward to greet him, but a small hand pulled the corner of her clothes. She turned her head in surprise, only to see the Sun Demon Duo and Moon Demon Duo standing beside her, lightly shaking their heads. For a moment, the little girl was in a dilemma. Most of the other people in the Star Moon Camp kept quiet out of fear. None of them recognized Gu Nan, and they didn't even know if he was an enemy or a friend. However, the fact that he was able to kill heroic spirit masters as if they were chickens was enough to make them feel fear. The scene returned to silence. After Gu Nan gave Gu Zhaoyue some instructions, he disappeared again, and Gu Zhaoyue began to organize everyone to explore. He had to find out why the moon slaves were gathering in the western part of the city. This was also Gu Nan's goal. In the Star Moon Camp, Lin Ke stood in a corner where there was little light, calmly watching a figure slowly go away, but her expression was not very good. Looks like there really is a problem with that laboratory. A man stood beside Lin Ke, his eyes filled with interest. It's already been 3 batches of people, yet none of them came back. Lin Ke replied expressionlessly, "A place that Gu Zhaoyue is guarding with all her might. Of course it's not simple." The man glanced at her. "The apocalypse is coming. There aren't many people in the organization that can be mobilized. I hope you won't make unnecessary sacrifices." "What do you mean?" Lin Ke's expression changed. Number 4 high school is the starting point of the Moon Slave disaster. Shouldn't we investigate the details of the Star Moon Camp? The man only sneered and did not say anything. The moon slave disaster had caused chaos in the Federation government. This was a great opportunity for the organization. The Star Moon camp naturally had to be investigated, but if he knew that Gu Zhaoyue was temporarily away, he would have informed the higher-ups of the organization. After all, he was a third-rank character. Just the tricks he left behind were not something that small shrimps could deal with. It was all because of Lin Ku's selfishness. Her sister was an important figure in the Star Moon camp, and it was said that Gu Zhaoyue had personally introduced her to the camp. Of course, she did not want to completely fall out with the Star Moon camp. The man's eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. In the western part of the city, the team from the Star Moon camp was advancing at a steady pace, clearing out the moon slaves along the way. The strength of the moon slaves had increased, but their average level was still not high. With the strength of this elite team, it would not take long for them to reach their destination. However, to prevent any accidents, everyone took turns to rest to ensure that the team was always in good condition. Lin Duo retreated from the outer circle and returned to the inner circle to rest. She actually did not have much to rest. The Sun Demon Duo and the Moon Demon Duo handled everything themselves. Ordinary summoning spirits did not have high intelligence, so they needed heroic spiritualists to command them. This was also why they were not as good as possession-type heroic spiritualists. However, the Sun Demon Duo were different. These two brats were not only smart, but their battle awareness was also very strong. Lin Duo only needed to observe the whole process. She retreated on time, so that the Sun Demon Duo and the Moon Demon Duo could rest. She was afraid that they would be tired. Zhang Ying stood beside Lin Duo. Seeing that she retreated, he moved closer to her and whispered, "Lin Duo, do you know the person who appeared before?" Zhang Ying's question was very abrupt, and it made Lin Duo panic. Needless to say, Zhang Ying must have heard what she blurted out when she saw Gunan. Seeing Lin Duo's reaction, Zhang Ying already knew the answer without waiting for an answer. He said in a deep voice, "You have to think carefully. That person killed a government official." But now, Zhang Ying was very distressed. How can a single person's power go against the country's machinery? When the moon slave is eliminated, the Federation will definitely settle the score, even if the government can let them go. Zhang Ying said with a serious face, "Is a person who has no respect for the country worth our friendship?" Lin Duo became silent. Of course, she could not win against Zhang Ying in an argument. In fact, she did not agree with Gunan's actions of wantonly killing people from the two camps. After all, that was the government's army, but Gunan was her heroic spirit. This made her very conflicted, but she could not come up with any countermeasures. Zhang Ying saw this and asked, "Lin Duo, tell me honestly, is that person closely related to you?" How did you know?" Lin Duo was shocked and subconsciously said. Zhang Ying showed a look of understanding. "Don't worry about this. Have you ever thought that if that person is designated as a wanted criminal in the future, will affect you?" For Lin Duo, who grew up in peacetime, the word wanted criminal was very lethal. It meant that she would have to say goodbye to the good old days forever. Lin Duo did not think about this before, but now she really began to panic. In the end, she was just a lucky high school girl. Chapter 139. Why won't he let me speak? No one knows better than me how powerful Gunan is, the Sun Demon said in a deep voice. With his help, we'll be able to eliminate the moon slaves more easily. The little lowly Moon Demon shook her head. There's no such person in the ancestors' prophecy. The only one who can end the moon slaves is our contractor. Prophecies are never completely accurate, Little Ming retorted. Although he never spoke much in front of others, he did not have a bad temper in front of the Moon Demon that lived with him. In fact, he would even refute her. The Moon Demon shook her head. "That guy, we know nothing about him. It's better to keep our contractor away from him." The advancement to the west of the city was smoother than expected. In just 2 hours, they arrived at the source of the anomaly shown on the map. This caused everyone's spirits to rise slightly. Even Lin Duo, who had a gloomy expression, revealed a curious expression. The thing that caused the mutation of the moon slaves was soon revealed to everyone. Contrary to everyone's expectations, it was actually a towering azure tree that towered into the sky. It looked as if it was carved out of a gem. It was so beautiful that it seemed unreal. This is a moon slave. No, I should say it's like a moon slave. It's an entity made entirely of moon energy, Gu Xiaoyue said immediately. Like many elemental creatures, moon slaves were individuals with a single rule. Their bodies were made of moon energy. However, there was no moon element in this world, so they were not considered elemental creatures. The reason why moon slaves were called moon slaves was because they would often worship the night sky due to their own power. The mutated moon slaves were contaminated, so they could not feel the moon. However, the giant tree in front of them was reproducing this scene. The moon slaves were all over the mountains. Their bodies glowed in red and blue as they quietly prostrated themselves under the giant tree. The arrival of the people from the Star Moon camp seemed to have triggered these moon slaves. They began to raise their heads and look in their direction. The eyes of the moon slaves glowed brightly, causing everyone's scalps to go numb. "Let's go." At Gu Xiaoyue's order, everyone ran for their lives without hesitation. It was as if they would be torn into pieces if they were a step slower. Lin Duo was still in a daze when she was dragged away by the sun and moon twin demons. A quantitative change would lead to a qualitative change. The number of moon slaves gathered here was just too terrifying. Even the most elite team would be overwhelmed in an instant. No wonder I didn't feel much pressure along the way. Gu Xiaoyue sighed inwardly. I'm afraid that all the moon slaves gathered nearby have squeezed into that area. But what exactly is that? The image of a huge tree flashed across Gu Xiaoyue's mind. She turned around and looked behind her. Does that person have a way to deal with so many moon slaves? Gunan naturally had a way. Even though the moon slaves in this area were so densely packed that it was inconvenient for him to use hidden shadow to sneak in, Gunan still had many ways to deal with them. He could use shadow body to lure the monsters and slowly kill off the moon slaves. He could also use shadow body to forcefully break through the moon slaves and then switch to his original body. However, he chose the simplest option, flying. Yes, moon slaves had a very awkward weakness. Because they were generally weak, there were no moon slaves with the ability to fly until now. The Morningstar heroic spiritualists did not train themselves much, so there were very few who had the ability to fly. It was the same even for the third rank. There were quite a few heroic spiritualists who could fly, but they could not carry people, could not attack for long, and could only fly at low altitudes. Only Gunan, a visitor from another world, was familiar with flying. Even in the astral realm, flying was almost an instinct of transcendence. Just like that, Gunan flew in unhurriedly from midair. The moon slaves on the ground began to roar, but could do nothing to him. They were not completely helpless. At the very least, many moon slaves were thrown up by their companions in an attempt to attack Gunan. However, Gunan was not one of those weak helicopters in the army. Even if these moon slaves could reach him, what was the point? After a while, Gunan arrived in front of the giant tree. Rather than saying that they're worshipping this tree, it's better to say that they're waiting for the fruits on it. Gunan could see clearly that there were many blue fruits growing on the branches of the giant tree. Each of them was crystal clear and had the same color as the giant tree, making it difficult to distinguish them from afar. This towering tree was so tall that the moon slaves could not reach the fruits. They could not even get close to the tree and could only wait for the fruits to fall on their own. Even without using his senses, he could feel the astonishing power coming from the fruits. Could the sons of moon slaves be made from something like this? How did this tree grow? Doubts flashed through Gunan's mind. However, Gunan's hand did not stop. He reached out and plucked a fruit from the tree, then threw it into the crowd of moon slaves. The entire scene seemed to go silent for a moment. In the next moment, there were probably more than 100,000 moon slaves in this area, and they all rioted. Screams, roars, and the sound of tearing could be heard everywhere. Countless moon slaves swarmed toward the place where the fruit had fallen. The lucky one who had been hit by the fruit immediately opened his mouth and swallowed the fruit. Unfortunately, he did not have time to digest the fruit, and he was torn apart by his companions in the blink of an eye. After all, the lucky one would not go far. One of the characteristics of moon slaves was that they could devour and assimilate each other. However, they did not have the tendency to devour their companions. In ancient times, moon slaves were not so common that they had not been discovered. Gunan was aware of this. Tian Yuan had used this method to forcefully implant polluting information into the bodies of moon slaves. It was the same now. The fruit's power had not been digested, but it was still contained in the lucky one's body. Hence, his companions continued to devour and assimilate it. The moon slave that had eaten him was torn apart and eaten by more moon slaves. The nature of the energy transformation meant that the fruit's power was not lost at all. It was only dispersed into the bodies of the moon slaves. This power was a fatal temptation to the moon slaves. The moon slaves continued to attack each other. In the short span of a few breaths, more than 100,000 moon slaves had been turned into large pieces of broken corpses. The number of moon slaves was decreasing, and the fruit's power was becoming more concentrated. The final victor was about to be decided. Gunan had been watching all this coldly from the sidelines. At this moment, he could not help but feel excited. Could it be that the one who was born from the fruit would be the son of Moon Slave? Following a deafening roar, a huge moon slave that was as tall as 3 or 4 people finally bit its opponent to death and enjoyed the fruit's power for itself. The evil god's temple in Gunan's mind trembled slightly, and a message was transmitted. Side mission: upgrade the king of moon slaves to the 3rd level. Chapter 140. Another side quest had appeared, which meant that the instance dungeon's rewards would be raised to another level. This was something to be happy about. However, there was something called a psychological gap. Gunan had been looking forward to completing the main quest, but he did not expect that the quest that he had gone through so much difficulty to complete was not to kill the target. However, one of the characteristics of a professional player was that they would never lose their composure. No matter how many traps there were, they would step on them all at least once, and one day they would clear the game. Gunan quickly calmed down and carefully observed the monster in front of him. The power of the giant tree fruit was digested and absorbed by the power of 100,000 moon slaves, and then gathered into the body of a single individual. The final result was that the body of the victor in front of Gunan was twisting and changing wildly, sometimes taking a human form, and sometimes twisting into strange lines. Towards the end, it even turned into a flat surface and then rapidly expanded. A terrifying aura spread out, and no living creature dared to approach it. Only Gunan continued to silently observe it. Gunan knew that the fruit alone would not have such an effect, and that was because there were too many moon slaves gathered here. Half an hour later, the giant moon slave finally stopped changing, and its body stopped at a height of almost 5 meters. Although it was not as exaggerated as when it expanded, it was still much taller than a normal moon slave, and it was extremely eye-catching. Its appearance was also very different from before. It was no longer the humanoid appearance of a moon slave, and there was no obvious animalization. What was strange was that it had something else: 2 arms and a pair of wings. This fellow, who was called the Moon Slave King by the evil god's temple, not only had a new pair of arms under his ribs, but also a pair of wings on his back, making him look majestic. However, from Gunan's point of view, he was actually not that powerful. In fact, he had only just reached level 2, and was about the same level as the current moon slaves. The fruit did not seem to give him power, but more like evolution. Gunan plucked another fruit and threw it in front of him, smiling. "Do you still want to eat it?" The Moon Slave King looked at it doubtfully, then sniffed it twice with his nose. He then shook his head and pushed the fruit aside, but gave Gunan a flattering smile. Although his smile was a little ugly, it was enough to move Gunan. Did it actually develop intelligence? Would killing him be considered as completing the mission? This was the first thought that popped up in Gunan's mind. His gaze suddenly became dangerous, but scared the Moon Slave King so much that he shrank back. However, he immediately rejected this idea. Firstly, this big guy was the king of moon slaves recognized by the evil god's temple. Secondly, he did not fit Tian Yuan's definition of a son of moon slave. When humans are corrupted, those who maintain their intelligence are the sons of moon slaves. Gunan picked up the fallen fruit from the ground and the rest of the fruits on the tree. There were only 5 or 6 of them in total. He then left with the king of moon slaves. This big guy seemed to be very happy to follow behind Gunan. "I'll call you number 1 for now." "Forget it. I'll just call you Big Baby," Gunan said as he looked at the 6 fruits in his hand. Star Moon Camp, Lin Duo's home. Lin Ku sat in front of the coffee table at home, holding a cup of black tea in her hand, but she could not drink it no matter how hard she tried. On the other hand, the man sitting opposite her looked much calmer than she did. Just as Lin Ku's irritation became more and more obvious, and the man was about to speak, the display screen in front of them suddenly lit up, but then dimmed again. Both of them perked up at the same time and quickly checked it. This was the last photo sent back by the person who had gone to explore the laboratory. The technology in the Morningstar plane was not very advanced, and it was not yet at the level of a live broadcast. The 2 photos were quickly developed. The first one was actually pitch black, which made people scratch their heads in confusion. Why is it pitch black? Could it be that he has already entered the laboratory, and the environment inside is completely dark? The man frowned as he analyzed the situation. Lin could not speak, but she somewhat agreed with him. However, when they saw the second photo, they suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. The angle of the second photo was very strange. It seemed to be taken close to the ground, and at the front of the picture was a pair of legs that were still standing. Both of them were very sure that these were the legs of the explorer. The location of the photo was on the explorer's forehead, which meant that his head had been chopped off. This detail sent a chill down their spines. The background of the second photo was even more shocking. There were countless huge breeding pods. Some were empty, but some were still operating, and what was placed inside were moon slaves. He really raised moon slaves in the middle of the camp. This Gu Zhaoyue is really daring. The man could not help but snort softly, but there was a hint of pride in his voice. This alone was enough to throw Star Moon Camp into chaos. If they used this photo to negotiate with Gu Zhaoyue, they might even be able to turn him into one of their own. Lin Ku was equally shocked, but she quickly frowned and said, "Something's not right. Why isn't there an enemy in front of him? Maybe he was ambushed from behind. What's so strange about that?" The man said disdainfully. In the photo, only the shadow of the explorer was slowly elongated in front of the legs. There were no traces of the enemy, but this could be explained. That's not right. The decapitated head is behind him, which means that the enemy should be in front. Could it be an invisibility ability? Lin Ku was still frowning, but before she could say anything, footsteps were heard, and the man suddenly disappeared. "I'm back." Lin Duo's listless voice was heard. She slowly opened the door and walked in. Lin Ku acted as if nothing had happened. She put away the 2 photos and walked over with a surprised look. "Why are you back so soon? I thought you were going to spend the night." Lin Duo threw herself into her sister's arms, almost crying out loud. She was full of grievances, but she did not know where to start. The people of Star Moon Camp returned much faster than before. After all, they were running for their lives, and they could not care less about the dangers around them. With the help of the sun and moon monsters, Lin Duo had no trouble running back to the camp. It was just that the adventure they had gone through so much trouble ended like this, which made the hopeful girl feel helpless. Lin Ku comforted her. "I'll heat up the dinner. Eat first, and then we'll talk." Lin Duo nodded with a sob, and Lin Duo went to the kitchen. After a while, she picked up the food and turned around, only to find that Lin Duo was standing behind her. "What are you doing? You scare me." Lin Ku rolled her eyes and said while touching her chest, "I just wanted to see what delicious food there is." Lin Duo seemed to have recovered a little, and a smile appeared on her face. Lin Ku said helplessly, "Don't stick so close to me next time." Lin Ku seemed to understand something, and her left hand shook violently. The porcelain bowl suddenly fell to the ground with a bang. Chapter 141. Just when Lin Ku finally understood the meaning of the photo and was in deep thought, Gunan was sitting in his lab, and a shadow was standing beside him, slowly merging into his body. The shadow body had many uses. In the past, Gunan could only use it as a support in battle, but after his profound meaning was unlocked, he could use it for other things. For example, he could create many shadow bodies to carry out different orders. Gunan was currently doing this. One was stationed at Lin Duo's side, and one was placed in the lab. However, unlike when the shadow body was near, it could only carry out some simple orders once it was far away from the body. For example, on Lin Duo's side, it was to protect Lin Duo from death, while in the lab, it was to kill all intruders. When Gunan merged the shadow body back into his body, everything the shadow body saw and heard became memories that he could read and browse. A few bugs. Gunan's slightly cold gaze swept across the faces of the intruders, but there was no one he was familiar with or interested in. After being beheaded by the shadow body, their bodies were still left in the lab, taken by Gu Zhaoyue for investigation. A moment later, Gu Zhaoyue's figure walked into the center of the lab and came to Gunan's side. "Sir, I've investigated. Before the apocalypse broke out, these people all came from an organization called Nighthawks." Gu Zhaoyue did not waste any time and said directly, "Nighthawks?" Gu Zhaoyue nodded and handed over a document. For intelligence on an entire organization like this, an oral description would never be as comprehensive as a written one. Gunan quickly scanned through the document, but he did not miss any of the information. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. An organization whose mission is to overthrow the federal government, but doesn't even dare to carry out a terrorist attack? Gunan evaluated in disdain. Nighthawks had absolute freedom as the purpose of the organization, and they had always been fighting against the government. However, the most eye-catching thing they did was to kidnap a top tycoon, and they even let him go in the end. If it were Gunan, he would dare to say, "Give me 30 players, and I'll even steal the wives of the heads of state for you to see." Throwing the files of the Nighthawks aside, Gunan said to Gu Zhaoyue, "Ignore them. Come and see our new comrades of the revolution." "Eldest brother." Gunan waved at him. Gu Zhaoyue raised her head in confusion. Then her eyes almost popped out. He saw a big fellow that was 4 to 5 times the size of a normal moon slave. It had a pair of wings on its back and 4 arms on its body. It was striding toward him, causing the floor to tremble. "My lord, is this Moon Slave?" If not for the fact that the other party's aura was too distinct, Gu Zhaoyue wouldn't have dared to recognize him. "This is the king of Moon Slaves," Gunan corrected. "Our king of Moon Slaves, eldest baby." Eldest child smiled at Gu Zhaoyue in a simple and honest manner, and then looked at Gunan with eager eyes. Gunan waved his hand, and the giant shadow hand grabbed a moon slave from the petri dish and tossed it in front of elder baby. The latter grabbed the moon slave and started gnawing on it without hesitation. This moon slave was still alive. When half of its head was bitten off, it had completely woken up and was struggling in pain. Of course, its strength was no match for eldest baby. No matter how much it struggled, it couldn't escape its fate. In the blink of an eye, the moon slave had been swallowed by elder baby. Not even a bone was left behind. Only the echoing screams and the bloodstains on the ground proved that the moon slave had survived. Even though Gu Zhaoyue was a hero spirit, he was shocked by this scene. This was because he could clearly sense that after eldest baby ate this moon slave, his strength had increased slightly. Eating moon slaves could increase one's strength? There were still thousands of moon slaves waiting outside. He couldn't help but look at Gunan. Where did my lord find such a monster? That tree. But it's not enough to just have eldest baby. Gunan didn't care about his thoughts. After elder baby saw him, he said, "Give me the addresses of the other 2 camps." "My lord, you want to—" Gunan didn't speak, but the endless bloodthirst in his eyes was enough to show what he wanted to do. In the camp of Glory, a group of people in military uniforms were having a meeting around a round table. There were men and women, old and young, but they all had one thing in common. They were soldiers. They were no longer amateurs commanding experts, but real soldiers. The arrival of the apocalypse had an unexpected benefit for the military. Those who only knew how to eat and do nothing could no longer hold high positions. Only those who were truly capable could be promoted. The 11 people sitting here were all the leaders of their respective troops. They were the ones who led a group of soldiers to fight for a path of survival without a commander. However, at this moment, these 11 soldiers all had grim expressions. The news that Zhu Long and Fong Xiue's troops had been annihilated in West City had finally reached them. Although there were no witnesses, the corpses were still there. It was obvious whether they were killed by the Moon Slave or their comrades. "How dare you? How dare you?" An old man slammed the table angrily. "This Gu Xiaoyue has no regard for the law. Elder Yin, the most important thing now is how we should deal with the Star Moon camp." A young man next to him said with a frown. Glory and Bravehearts were actually a family now. Both sides had chosen to ally, and Zhu Long and Fong Kaiwei were their representatives. There's no doubt about Zhu Long's strength. The Star Moon camp could annihilate them all. Whether it's a sneak attack or something else, we can't act rashly. We can't act rashly. Are we just going to sit here and wait for death? With the Moon Slave here, their main force won't be able to come over. The result of the 11 people's meeting was that no one could convince anyone, especially when they were faced with a dilemma. Stop arguing. In the end, it was the oldest and most reputable elder who spoke up. Everyone else followed his words and stopped talking. "Elder He, come up with a countermeasure." "Elder He, I'll listen to you." Elder He looked around at everyone and nodded lightly. "Instead of arguing here, why don't we—" Before Elder He finished speaking, everyone suddenly felt a breeze blow past. A figure actually appeared at the side of the round table. This person was wearing a gray suit and was expressionless. He was holding an azure fruit in his hand. The 11 soldiers stood up at the same time, and a few of them shouted, "Who are you? How'd you get in?" The person's calm gaze swept across the surroundings, but he did not answer their question. He only revealed a faint smile. "Not bad material. I hope the second child won't disappoint me." As he spoke, he released the restriction in his hand, and the aura of the fruit began to slowly dissipate. Everyone could not understand what he was saying, but as the aura dissipated, everyone could clearly feel the tremor that seemed to come from an endless distance. Chapter 142. A strange aura was slowly emitted from the fruit. Even though none of the people present recognized what that fruit was, the extremely dense and deep power it emitted was sufficient to astonish them. Gunan's expression did not change even the slightest when questioned or scolded. The next moment, 11 shadow figures stood up from behind the crowd and raised their swords. One of them ran away. Gunan sat still and looked to the side. A young figure was running away quickly. However, he did not run for long before a shadow figure caught up with him and hacked him to death. With Gunan's current power, dealing with these heroic spiritualists who lack power was like beating up a child. Gunan's body floated up again and stood in midair. He left the fruit on the table. He was not worried that it would be taken away because no one could walk out of this campsite alive. Attracted by the fruit's power, countless moon slaves started to run toward the campsite. Those who dared to stand in their way could only be torn apart. The people in the Glory campsite were in trouble. The overwhelming number of moon slaves swarmed toward them. Many humans did not even have the chance to escape and were directly drowned in the tide of moon slaves. As for those who had the ability to resist, most of them were bitten to death and turned into moon slaves. Faced with an absolute advantage in numbers, most people were powerless. "Xiaowu, run! Run quickly!" A woman struggled and shouted as she threw a little boy away with all her might. However, before she could finish her sentence, a few moon slaves had already dragged her away. Hearing the clear chewing sounds coming from behind him, Xiaowu, who had just turned 7, ran forward with all his might with tears in his eyes. He lowered his head and did not dare to look back. Fear and hatred intertwined in his heart. The pain of watching his mother die without being able to do anything made him feel extremely pained. "I also want to become a heroic spiritualist. I want to fight like my father." Before Xiaowu could finish his thoughts, he suddenly stopped. He had already arrived at the center of the campsite, in front of the round table conference. The fruit emitted a faint blue light, while Gu Nan calmly floated in midair. Xiaowu had never heard of any of these words, but did not prevent him from imagining similar scenes. He shouted at the sky, "Uncle, please save me, I—" Before Xiaowu's voice could travel far, a moon slave appeared behind him and tore him into two halves. Gunan looked down in confusion, only to see a small figure torn apart. He said with some regret, "I still don't know if it's a lowly." In a laboratory of the Star Moon camp, Gu Xiaoyue was nowhere to be seen. Tian Tian was still tied to the central pillar. She had not been able to rest for the whole night. Her physical exhaustion made her tired and hungry. Her lips were chapped, and she didn't want to say a word. But at this moment, a large head swayed back and forth in front of her, holding up the corpse of a moon slave. Half of the head had been split open, and it almost reached her face. "You get lost." Tian Tian was so disgusted by the brain that she vomited stomach acid again. Then she roared at eldest baby, "How many times have I told you? I don't eat this." Eldest baby looked at the corpse of the moon slave in his hand in confusion. With his simple intelligence, he could not understand the concept of taste. Also locked in a laboratory by Gunan, eldest baby had no one else to communicate with, so he had to play with Tian Tian. When Tian Tian showed that she was hungry and thirsty, eldest baby smashed a petri dish, grabbed the moon slave out of it, tore into pieces, and gave it to her. Student Tian Tian cooperated and fainted. When she woke up, she was faced with such a situation. She had to communicate with a mentally handicapped eldest baby, with unknown consequences. The glory camp was quickly destroyed, and the remaining humans kept retreating to the center. Many people found out where Gunan was, and also the fruit. They didn't need to think too much to know who the culprit behind all of this was. But what about it? Gunan just stood calmly in the sky and did not respond to their curses or pleas. As for those who tried to get close to the fruit, naturally, none of them were spared. Regardless of gender, age, or gender, Gunan made life equal. They would all die anyway. About half an hour later, a second tall moon slave king stood in front of Gunan, but this time, the evil god temple did not give him a side mission. Then, let's go to the next place, second baby. A sinister and flattering smile appeared on second baby's face. His personality was completely different from eldest baby's. "Can you help me untie the rope?" Tian Tian said to eldest baby. Her big round eyes told him that she needed help. Eldest baby scratched the back of his head in confusion. He had no idea what she was talking about. With eldest baby's intelligence, the most he could understand was that he was hungry. He could not count on anything else. Tian Tian was furious. She pushed her head back and moved her hands up and down, trying to attract eldest baby's attention to the rope. Obviously, eldest baby misunderstood her. He raised his hand and slapped the pillar. His monstrous strength made the pillar shake, and Tian Tian was so shaken that her whole body was shaking. She shook her head repeatedly to stop eldest baby from doing it again. Eldest baby seemed to realize that he had done something wrong. He scratched his head honestly. Lin Ke sat alone in her house with a gloomy expression. Lin Duo had already fallen asleep. She finally had the chance to do her own thing. There's an obvious vibration coming from the central lab. Even some of the residents nearby felt it. A voice came into her ears. It was the man in black from before. "You?" Lin Ke's expression changed. She forced herself to speak in a low voice. "I devil, who allowed you to enter my house?" The man called I devil sneered. "I'm here. What do you want?" Lin Ke's anger slowly disappeared, but her gaze became dangerous. Exposing herself in front of her sister was better than being threatened by this man. I devil seemed to know what she was thinking. She coughed and said, "Lord Ghost Tree will visit the lab in 15 minutes. That's all I have to say." As soon as she finished her words, I devil disappeared without a trace. Lin Ke's eyes were burning with anger. But a moment later, her figure also quickly disappeared into the night. At this moment, a figure slowly walked out from the second floor. It was Lin Duo, and Sun Devil and Moon Devil were beside her. "Sister, did she go to the lab?" Lin Duo did not forget what Tian Tian had told her. "So, are we going there?" Sun Devil's soft voice sounded in her ears. It was like the whisper of the devil from the abyss, full of temptation. Chapter 143. Gunan's operation was not going well. The scene of 100,000 moon slaves gathering during the creation of Elder Baby was too difficult to replicate. Only God knew when the giant tree appeared and how long it took to gather the moon slaves. Ever since the fruits were collected by Gunan, their power was still slowly draining despite being sealed with shadow energy. Gunan did not have the time to wait any longer. Especially after they were taken out, their power would quickly dissipate. Therefore, he had to choose a place with a lot of people and use them to turn into moon slaves to gather as much power as possible. After nearly 2 hours of running, there were 5 moon slave kings of different sizes standing in front of Gunan. They were created by Gu and using the human survivors gathered in the camps. It could be said that each of them was stained with the blood of thousands of people. Glory and Bravehearts created second baby and third baby. They were the 2 largest among the 5. The other 3 camps were much weaker. Sixth baby was only the height of 2 people and was not much stronger than a normal moon slave. There are no camps in the imperial capital that can be considered big. Gunan shook his head helplessly. Do I have to make do? No, there's actually one more. Lin Duo sneaked to the vicinity of the laboratory. It was pitch black inside and outside. Lin Duo gritted her teeth. She did not do something as stupid as turning on her flashlight. She sneaked in through a small door and walked forward step by step under the moonlight. This was her school. However, the path she was familiar with was unusually long. She could not reach the end even after walking for a long time. Xiao Ming, Xiao Yu, am I under an illusion? She could not help but call out to her heroic spirit. You just can't walk anymore. The sun monster, Xiao Ming, appeared and pointed out coldly. Lin Duo's legs were trembling. Of course, she could not walk anymore. Lin Duo could not help but blush. Just as she was about to retort, she heard a sudden loud noise. She quickly looked up in shock. She saw an ancient tree slowly opening at the entrance of the laboratory. That was the sound of the door falling. Lin Duo quickly held her breath and hid in the dark to observe. Ghost tree, do we need to take care of Lin Ko? A devil was standing next to an old man in a red robe. The old man pushed up the glasses on his face and shook his head. The lab is more important. Gu Zhao will be back soon. He looked up at the shadow in the distance, his heart cold. A devil didn't know, but he did. This was the birthplace of the moon slave disaster. Little Snow, Little Tan. In the next moment, the old man restrained all his emotions and said coldly, "Let's go." In the laboratory, Tian went through a lot of hardships and finally solved herself. When eldest baby handed her the 4th moon slave's corpse, Tian finally stopped fainting. She finally discovered the opportunity to escape. The moon slave's body was full of glass shards from the broken walls of the cultivation chamber. So, Tian resisted the nausea, held a fragment in her mouth, and cut the rope in front of her bit by bit. When she could finally free her hands, the corners of her mouth were already full of blood. She wiped the corner of her mouth with her hand and felt a burning pain, but she didn't feel frustrated at all. Gunan, Tian gritted her teeth as the face appeared in her mind. When I get out, I'll tell the world about your evil deeds. Bang. The door of the laboratory was suddenly blown open. The old man in the red robe and devil walked in. The two seemed to have understood something when they saw Tian's miserable condition. They immediately asked in a pleasant tone, "Young lady, were you captured?" Tian nodded blankly, feeling that her injuries were worthless. Lin Duo was following behind the two sneakily. She felt that she had done a good job of hiding. She even had the time to poke her head out to see if her sister was inside. It's Tian. Oh, Lin Duo saw Tian's figure. Before she could be happy, a hand suddenly covered her mouth and dragged her backward. She could only let out a whimper, but when she saw the face of the person behind her, she stopped struggling. Lin Ku's face was terrifyingly gloomy. He said coldly, "Come with me immediately. There are signs of moon slaves gathering here. It'll be too late if we don't leave now." He was about to drag Lin Duo away when the latter hurriedly broke free and pointed to the laboratory. But Tian is still in the laboratory, not far from the laboratory in Star Moon Camp. Gu Zhaoyue was standing beside Gunan. He was speechless as he looked at the glowing blue fruit in Gunan's hand. With his knowledge, he could tell what Gunan was doing at a glance. That was why he couldn't accept it. Sir, once the camp is destroyed, it'll be difficult to rebuild it. Gu Zhaoyue tried to persuade him. It was the easiest to build a survivor's camp during the early stages of the apocalypse. However, it was almost impossible to do it again a month after the apocalypse. There were only so many humans in the imperial capital. Those who had not found a camp were either extraordinarily strong or dead. Gunan's face was still expressionless. There's no need. After the second side mission appeared, as Gunan's understanding of Elder Baby deepened, so did his understanding of the entire instance dungeon. The king of moon slaves could evolve by eating moon slaves, but there was an upper limit. Elder Baby had been fed to a critical point and was only one step away from entering level 3. It was easy for Gunan, who had the other 6 fruits, to figure out what the next step was. It seemed that Elder Baby's name was not wrong. The blue light was getting brighter. Gunan had done this a few times, so he was familiar with the process. The movements coming from the laboratory were also faithfully reported to him by his shadow body. He was close enough that both sides were under his control. Then, I'll leave this to you. Gunan revealed a meaningful smile as his body gradually turned black. In the laboratory, Lin Ku braced himself and walked out. Just as he was about to speak, Gui Shu turned around and said with a faint smile, "Why? Don't you want that little friend to come out too?" Lin Ku was stunned. Lin Duo, who was behind her, had already poked her head out and even greeted, "Hello, uncle." Lin Ku's mouth twitched. She wanted to cover her sister's mouth, but Tian saw her and screamed, "Lin Duo, it's Gunan, it's all Gunan's doing." Lin Duo was startled by her, and her face turned pale. She hadn't told anyone about Mr. Gunan. Gunan. Lin Ku suddenly turned around and stared at her sister. She had not forgotten about the king-level heroic spirit. Did Tian mean that the central laboratory was Gunan's doing? If that was the case, her mind was filled with thoughts. Even Gui Shu said softly, "So that person is called Gunan? Wait, who is it?" As soon as Gui Shu finished speaking, a branch appeared out of thin air on his right and lashed out. A black shadow was pulled out and gradually turned into the figure of Gunan. The latter looked at him with slight surprise. "Interesting, you're the first person in this world who can beat me out. You are Gunan?" Gui Shu pushed his glasses up again. There seemed to be some more wrinkles on his old face. "You are also the first person I cannot extract life force from. It seems that you do not know me." Behind Gui Shu, there seemed to be a scarlet tree standing up and continuously extracting life force from the surroundings. This old man's origin was very strange. Gunan thought for a long time, but had no impression of him. He asked curiously, "Do we have a grudge?" Gui Shu thought of his children who died tragically. When he heard that Jiang Shui and Jiang Tian died, how heartbroken he was. His eyes became colder and colder. "You can't remember? Then let me remind you." Gui Shu, who was wearing a red robe, put away his black-rimmed, gold-striped glasses and said expressionlessly. Chapter 144. The appearance of an old man with the surname Jiang caused the atmosphere in the laboratory to turn strange. Lin Duo could not believe that Mr. Gu Nan would do such a thing. Lin Ku was shocked by the connection between Gu Nan and his sister. Only eldest brother scratched his head, completely clueless as to what was going on. Gunan still could not recall who this person was. When the two policemen, Jiang Tian and Jiang Shui, entered the laboratory, he did not know their names. Naturally, he could not guess the ghost tree's identity. However, this did not affect his actions. The shadow sword pierced into the ghost tree's heart in an instant. However, the ghost tree did not move, and a smile appeared on his aged face. Gunan's sword seemed to have no effect on him at all. The shadow of the ancient tree behind him slowly solidified until it was completely solid, standing in front of everyone. This was a true third-rank heroic spiritualist and was at the peak. According to the classification of the cosmic realm, he was at the same level as a Tao Lord. They had already broken through the boundary between the two types of heroic spiritualists. Their heroic spirits and bodies were always in a state of half-fusion. and they could fight alone or by themselves. One of the few Dao Lords in the Morningstar realm had actually appeared in front of Gunan. The realm of a Dao Lord? Gunan frowned slightly. His strength was only a portion of his body's, so it would not be easy to kill a Dao Lord. With a flip of his right hand, the long sword fell towards the ancient tree, stabbing at the same spot 15 times in a row. He pierced a big hole in the ancient tree, but before he could do anything else, the big hole quickly healed. "It's useless." The ghost tree spoke expressionlessly, his eyes devoid of any emotion. "I've extracted the life force of tens of thousands of people. How can you kill me?" Gunan only looked at him coldly. If the enemy was already in an invincible position and still continued to talk nonsense, there was only one possibility. He did not have the ability to kill the enemy, at least not yet. He was stalling for time. Gunan saw this, and a faint smile appeared on his face. He stood on the spot without moving, but his body gradually turned black. Although with Gunan's skills, he could always kill the monsters he wanted, there was a problem of cost-effectiveness. Killing the other party would take a lot of effort and time, and there were no benefits to be gained. On the other hand, not killing the other party would not cause any losses, so why kill the other party? Gunan had never thought of himself as a bloodthirsty person. He simply wanted to complete a mission. Seeing this, the ghost tree's expression changed slightly. It could no longer maintain its confident expression. The ancient tree behind it suddenly opened all its branches, emitting a scarlet light. Everyone's hearts sank. It was as if something was slowly flowing out of their bodies towards the ancient tree. Ghost Tree's expression was still gloomy. He could clearly feel the life link from everyone except Gunan. The blackening of Gunan's body continued, and a red light began to glow beneath his feet. It was the Ghost Tree's heroic spirit domain. Unfortunately, before the red light could completely surround Gunan, he had already turned into a black shadow and shattered, as if he was never there in the first place. Damn it! Seeing that his domain was only one step away from completion, but his opponent managed to escape, Ghost Tree could not help but curse. His heroic spirit domain could attack and defend at the same time, but it was not good enough for pursuit. What he was most afraid of was his opponent turning around and leaving without a fight. Therefore, he had been stalling for time with words from the beginning. He did not expect Gunan to still escape. Gu Zhaiyue stood next to Gunan's shadow body, watching the fruit glowing blue. Even he wanted to hide from the majestic aura. Is this the fruit of that tree? No wonder it can attract moon slaves. Gu Zhaiyue could feel the faint aura of moon slaves around him. Connecting it to the giant tree, he could roughly guess what was going on. 5 tall moon slaves with different expressions were sizing them up curiously, which made Gu Zhaiyue even more confused. He did not know what Gunan was doing. In fact, he could not even understand Gunan's actions all this while. There was no such thing as unconditional loyalty in this world. Gu Zhaiyue was an ambitious person, or rather, an ambitious heroic spirit. He was only passionate about power. When Gunan was able to back him up and provide him with power, Gunan would naturally be able to gain his loyalty. However, things were different now. Gunan wanted to destroy everything he had. Gu Zhaiyue clenched his fists, hesitating. His rationality told him that even if he destroyed the fruit, Gunan would not let him and his campsite go. However, was he going to just watch everything happen? "Grandpa Gu, what are you doing here?" A childish voice came from the side. Gu Zhaiyue turned his head in surprise. He saw a little girl about 5 or 6 years old standing next to the bushes. She was holding a little white dog in her arms. The little white dog looked at Gu Zhaiyue and even barked twice. Gu Zhaiyue looked at them blankly. He did not know this little girl, but he felt that she looked familiar. However, he knew very well that in the little girl's eyes, he might be the savior of the world. He raised his head, and his gaze toward the blue fruit gradually became determined. "Master Ghost Tree, the moon slaves are gathering outside, and the source of power is not far away. Do you think it was done by that person?" A demon approached Ghost Tree and said in a low voice. Ghost Tree's eyes lit up, and he blurted out, "It must be him. Several campsites have been destroyed by the moon slaves today. It was all the result of a large number of moon slaves gathering. It must be Gu Nan's doing. On the other side, Lin Duo and the others had just heard the news. Lin Duo asked in confusion, "Sister, what's going on with the gathering of moon slaves?" Lin Ku's face turned pale. Before she could speak, Moon Demon murmured, "It's the power of the guiding moon fruit. He actually used it here." As a witness of the trip to the western city, Lin Duo also understood what Gunan had done after Moon Demon's explanation. The fear in her heart grew deeper and deeper. Mr. Gunan, how could he? She did not know how many times she had tried to communicate with Gunan with her heroic spirit contract, but her attempts were futile. "We have to stop him." Sun Demon rarely took the initiative to speak. If the power of the 7 guiding moon fruits is fused together, the true king of moon slaves will be born, and the disaster of moon slaves will be unstoppable. Lin Duo was not used to Xiaoming's long speech, but she understood the meaning behind his words. In the end, it was just one word: stop him. Ghost Tree and I Demon's figures had already disappeared, and Lin Duo and the others hurried over. "Wait, I'll go too," Tian said. Lin Duo and her sister had no reason to stop her, so they immediately nodded and agreed. But no one expected that a big guy would stand up at this time and grab Tian with one hand. "Hey, what are you doing? Let me go, Chapter 145. The moon slaves had started to invade the Star Moon camp. Gu Xiaoyuan knew that he had no other choice but to save the people in the camp. Even if he destroyed the fruit now, he could not stop the waves of moon slaves. He could only choose to take it with him. Only by letting the source of attraction come from another place could the camp be spared from disaster. Gu Xiaoyuan slowly approached the shadow in the center. He did not dare to take his eyes off Gu Nan. He had no choice but to be careful. After a while, Gu Xiaoyuan finally went behind the shadow and found a chance to attack. He punched the shadow with all his might. The shadow did not even make a sound. It turned into a black shadow and disappeared. The fruit fell into Gu Xiaoyuan's hand. The success was so smooth that Gu Xiaoyuan almost thought it was Gu Nan's trap. However, the fruit in his hand was clearly emitting a strong wave of energy. "There's no time. Even if it's a trap, I have to step into it." Gu Xiaoyuan clenched his teeth and flew out of the camp. However, a scarlet branch whipped over, directly smashing his plans to pieces. The ghost tree had arrived. The old man in a red robe slowly walked out from the night sky. The old tree behind him was still solid. The horrifying power displayed made Gu Xiaoyuan's heart cold. He looked at the fruit in Gu Xiaoyuan's hand and asked coldly, "Where is Gu Nan?" Gu Xiaoyuan listened to the other party's question and lowered his head to look at his hand. His heart was filled with bitterness. It was really too much of coincidence. Now, no one would believe him when he said that he wasn't in cahoots with Gu Nan. However, Gu Xiaoyuan was an old man who had lived for thousands of years. He reacted quickly. He did not hand the fruit over. Instead, he pointed in a direction and said he went that way. "Sir, please follow me. I left a mark on him." "Oh." The ghost tree raised his eyebrows. His expression was still cold, but his voice seemed to be interested. Gu Xiaoyuan's eyes flashed with a hint of pride. His words were obviously fake. However, the other party would not be able to tell immediately. As long as he led the way, his goal would be achieved. Right now, he only wanted to protect the camp. He didn't want his hard work to go to waste, and he didn't want the innocent survivors in the camp to die because of Gu Nan's selfish desires. "I'm still too soft-hearted in the end." Gu Xiaoyuan felt rather helpless in his heart, but he did not regret it at all. If they really lived like Gu Nan, where even the most basic humanity was obliterated, then what was the point of living? "Oh," a no similar to that of the ghost tree was heard, but it came from the other side that Gu Xiaoyuan was pointing at. Gu Nan was standing there with his arms crossed. Gu Xiaoyuan's face turned pale. The next moment, Gu Nan suddenly appeared in front of him and stabbed his abdomen. Shadow power began to surge out in a frenzy. Pitch-black color rapidly spread from the wound, covering most of Gu Xiaoyuan's body in the blink of an eye. "You don't even have the qualifications to be nourishment." This was Gu Nan's evaluation of Gu Xiaoyuan. He was a heroic spirit who couldn't even be converted into a moon slave, so what was the point of keeping him? Dong, 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 dong. Elder Baby's heavy footsteps were heard. When Lin Duo and the others arrived, they saw Gu Zhaoyue being stabbed in the abdomen. "Mr. Gu," Lin Duo immediately exclaimed, but her cry could not change anything. Gu Zhaoyue was torn into pieces in the blink of an eye. Gu Zhaoyue was a type of natural heroic spirit, a guardian of the magic box. In reality, he was purely a body of energy, and there was no such thing as a physical body. Therefore, he was very resistant to physical damage, but when faced with Gu Nan's attacks on the level of rules, he seemed especially weak. The energy all over his body was eroded by the shadow power, turning into fragments that scattered all over the sky. The black fragments kept hitting her face. Lin Duo stared blankly ahead, and the emotions in her heart finally exploded. "Mr. Gunan, why are you doing this?" Gunan glanced at her coldly and slowly took a step forward. The Sun Demon Duo and the Moon Demon Duo immediately blocked in front of him. A strange smile appeared on Gunan's face. These two twin heroic spirits that he had personally released were now blocking in front of him. Speaking of which, it was quite interesting. Of course, having done all kinds of strange missions, Gunan was already immune to this kind of thing. These two little fellows were one of the side missions, so he would spare their lives. He could cripple them, but it was fine as long as they were not dead. "Gunan, you used the moon guiding fruit to create the king of moon slaves. If the moon slaves rule the continent one day, you'll be the culprit," the little lowly moon demon said coldly. Gunan smiled, but did not say anything. He only reached out to grab her head. The moon demon reacted very quickly, as if she was already prepared. Her figure suddenly blurred, and Gu Nan returned empty-handed. "Interesting." Gunan smiled. These two little fellows were not very powerful, but their abilities were quite strange. The Sun Demon also walked forward and looked at him coldly. "You've been betrayed by your friends and family. You'll die a horrible death." Gunan did not say anything else. He calmly looked around. Lin Ku was confused. Lin Duo was confused and lost. The Sun Demon Duo and the Moon Demon Duo were indifferent, and Tian was filled with deep-rooted hatred. Everyone's emotions appeared in his mind. Gunan lightly shook his head. They might never understand that their opinions meant nothing to Gunan. At the same time, a flash of red light suddenly appeared behind Gunan. It was a branch that suddenly whipped down and hit Gunan's back. The attack was silent and did not cause much damage to Gunan, but it successfully attracted his attention. The ghost tree slowly walked over and smiled. "The moon slave disaster has spread across the entire continent. I never thought that the Nighthawks would one day save the world." Gunan also smiled. He let go of the moon, guiding fruit in his hand, and let it fall to the ground. "Well then, save yourselves first." The red light under Gunan's feet shone brightly. The ghost tree's realm of heroes had been completed. However, the moon slave's shouts could be heard behind him. The moon slaves were here. The ghost tree seemed to have understood something. He looked at Gu Nan in disbelief. He pushed the power of his realm to the limit. The branches that were flying in the sky looked like a group of demons dancing. When the first moon slave appeared, Gunan used a flash attack and disappeared from the ghost tree's realm. The realm could restrict the power of rules and could even break Gu Nan's hidden shadow. However, the evil god's temple's skills could ignore it. "No!" The ghost tree let out an angry roar, but he could only watch as Gu Nan's figure completely disappeared after a few leaps. More and more moon slaves gathered around them. The mountains and plains stretched as far as the eye could see. Other than Gu Zhaoyue, Gunan did not kill anyone else this time because they could all be nourishment. Chapter 146. The moon slaves were wreaking havoc and blood was flowing everywhere. The Star Moon Camp, which was supposed to be the last pure land in the capital, did not manage to escape the disaster. The home that Gu Zhaoyue had built with her blood, sweat, and tears was destroyed by Gu Nan so easily. The moon slaves had reached the vicinity of the guiding moon fruit. They could see the fruit and charged toward it like crazy. As usual, they tried to tear everything in front of them apart. However, this time was different. The scarlet ancient tree slowly opened up behind the ghost tree. Any moon slave that dared to approach him would be torn into pieces. The apocalypse was terrifying, but for a powerhouse like the ghost tree, No matter how many moon slaves there were, they would not be able to stop him unless he was determined to die. On the other hand, the king of moon slaves was a natural deterrent to normal moon slaves. No moon slave dared to approach them. The 6 kings of moon slaves, including eldest baby and 6th baby, stood there stupidly. Some of them had different expressions, but all of them were staring at the guiding moon fruit. Even eldest baby, who was the least intelligent among them, knew that the homologous power from the fruit was the source of his transformation. However, the others were not so lucky. The moon slaves that were charging at them from all directions posed a fatal threat to them, even if they were not their targets. Devil was not powerful. As soon as he was surrounded by the moon slaves, he began to feel powerless. "Master, save me. Master." He could only ask for help from the ghost tree. However, the ghost tree did not even look at him, let alone put him under its protection. Devil felt a chill in his heart. However, how could he fight back under such circumstances? His mind was in a mess. His hands began to move out of control. In the blink of an eye, he was torn apart by the moon slaves. On the other side, Lin Duo and the others were also panicking. Lin Ku was not much stronger than Devil. Moreover, she was a possession-type heroic spiritualist. Under such circumstances, she did not dare to step forward. Otherwise, she would be courting death. At the crucial moment, it was the twin heroic spirits of the sun and moon demons that protected their lives. The 2 little demons stood one in front and one at the back. On the ground, there was a pattern of intersecting sun and moon, isolating the moon slaves from the outside. The barrier that isolated the moon slaves seemed to be a protective barrier. From the outside, it looked like a thin film that could be easily broken. Fortunately, they were not the moon slaves' targets. Most of them chose to detour or climb over the wall after they ran into a wall. The moon slaves were so densely packed that it was hard to distinguish them with the naked eye. They almost covered the entire protective barrier. Lin Duo, Tian Tian, and Tian Tian stayed within the protective barrier, not daring to move at all. This was because even the last bit of moonlight had been covered by the bodies of the moon slaves. In the darkness, even time seemed to slow down. Lin Duo felt some sweat on her forehead. She wanted to raise her hand to wipe it off, but she couldn't. It was as if Mount Tai was pressing down on her, making it hard for her to breathe. The dark environment seemed to isolate her from the outside world. "We have to think of a way." The sun demon's weak voice finally brought Lin Duo back to reality. "We can't hold on for much longer, and once the real moon slave king arrives, everything will be too late," the moon demon added. She sounded stronger than the sun demon. She wasn't as weak as the sun demon, but she sounded helpless. "The last time we saw the moon guiding fruit, it would take at least half a month to ripen, but who knew that person took it?" When Sun Monster Xiao Ming said this, it sounded as if he was gnashing his teeth. They didn't know that Gu Nin had flown over directly, but they were surprised that he could obtain the moon-guiding fruit from such a large number of sons of moon slaves. Lin Duo became even more silent. In her heart, Gu Nin was the heroic spirit that she had summoned. So, no matter what Gu Nin did, she was responsible for it, even though she couldn't control him. Lin Ku was more concerned about the current situation. She spoke in the darkness. "Is there any way to lure the moon slaves away? Or should we try to move out?" "We can't move." Before the moon demon could finish her sentence, she suddenly felt some light above her head. The dim moonlight was like a lighthouse, illuminating the path in front of them. The moon slaves had dispersed. They had held on, but soon, a big face appeared above them, revealing a simple and honest smile. Only then did they realize that although the moon slaves had slowed down, it was far from the end. The one who had saved them was Eldest Baby. Eldest Baby scratched the back of his head, pointing at Tian Tian and then at his shoulder. "You want me to sit on it?" Tian Tian was slightly startled and asked doubtfully. Eldest Baby nodded, although she wasn't sure if he could understand Tian Tian's words. Tian Tian looked at her companion strangely, and she couldn't help but hesitate. According to the 2 heroic spirits, this was the king of moon slaves. "Since it invited you, why don't you accept it?" The moon demon was like a small adult. The king of moon slaves would have a good impression of humans. Why didn't the ancestors prophesy about this? Of course, no one could answer a question. After a while, eldest baby carried Tion on his back and started walking forward slowly, satisfied. Wherever eldest baby passed, no moon slave dared to approach. Lin Duo and the others had no choice but to follow him in order not to fall into the trap again. Time passed, and seventh baby's production was coming to an end. Although more moon slaves were gathering, the power of the guiding moon fruit had been divided into hundreds of portions. After this period of fighting, the moon slaves who had survived had far more power than ordinary moon slaves. Devil's corpse was nowhere to be found, and Ghost Tree was still standing at the side, observing everything coldly. He was waiting. He was sure that Gu Nin did not make such a big fuss just to watch a show. As long as he returned, he would still have a chance to take revenge. However, Ghost Tree was not in a good situation either. There were too many moon slaves. Although he was strong, there were too many of them, and the heroic spirits did not have any life force for him to absorb, so they were one of the most annoying enemies. The long battle had consumed most of his power, and he even suffered some injuries. Right at this moment, the last moon slave to emerge victorious was finally born. Roar! With a deafening roar, the king of moon slaves, who is usually called seventh baby, finally stabilized his power and looked around coldly. Including eldest baby, the other six king of moon slaves slowly approached, as if some kind of power was guiding them. Chapter 147. Seeing eldest baby's action, the other six moon slave kings looked at each other and extended their palms one by one. 7 palms of different sizes stacked on top of each other. The faint moonlight grew brighter and brighter, even a little dazzling under the night sky. When the 7 of them stood together, the difference between them was obvious. Eldest baby, who was born from 100,000 moon slaves, was not only the tallest, but also the strongest. Hence, he was obviously the leader. Second baby, third baby, and 7th baby, who was born last, were in the second echelon. They were born from the 3 camps, and the rest were not worth mentioning. Tion was already standing at the side, watching the scene nervously. She knew that eldest baby had reached a critical moment. It was unknown when Gu Nin had reappeared. He stood at the side and looked over with interest. Could it be that the 7 of them have merged into one? Looks like the name was right. Gu Nin stroked his chin. Looking at the situation, the name he had given out of bad taste might actually come true. When a moonlight reached a critical point, 6th baby, who was the weakest among them, suddenly trembled and turned into a ball of white light. It began to disperse into the bodies of the other 6. The strength of the 6 rose abruptly. Eldest baby, who was the strongest among them, even broke through the threshold of the 3rd grade and let out a deafening roar. Side quest completed. Upgrade the Moon Slave Kings to the 3rd grade. The words came from the evil god's temple as promised, causing a smile to appear on Gu Nin's face. According to the difficulty of this dungeon, this meant that he had earned at least 20 sin points. However, this was not a large quest, so the reward would be calculated after the quest was completed. Moreover, according to the pattern of the main quest, after this side quest was completed, the main quest clue should also appear. However, there were no new NPCs here. Gu Nin's gaze swept across Lin Duo and the others, and the smile on his face widened. The 7 moon slave kings continued to merge. One by one, their companions were destroyed, causing the strength of the remaining to rise rapidly. In the end, even 2nd baby and 3rd baby were destroyed. Only eldest baby, who had expanded into a 20-meter tall giant, and 7th baby, who was almost the same size as him, were left. Eldest baby opened his eyes in confusion and looked at the big guy beside him, as if wondering why he had not shattered into light. But at this moment, a strange, sinister smile suddenly appeared on 7th baby's originally stiff face. That was a smile that the kings of moon slaves, with their intelligence, should not have. Eldest baby did not even understand the meaning of that smile before he felt a sharp pain on his neck. 7th baby suddenly opened his mouth and bit down on eldest baby's neck. Roar! Eldest baby roared in pain. He wanted to retract his hand, but seventh baby held it tightly. He couldn't move at all. He raised his hand to hit him, but seventh baby's movements were much more agile than his. His every move was like a master who had immersed himself in martial arts for hundreds of years. Eldest baby could not even touch a hair of his. After a few leaps, seventh baby bit down again. This time, even eldest baby's face was torn in half, revealing the crystalline blue meridians underneath. On the other side, Tian screamed and hurriedly wanted to go forward, but she was grabbed by Gunan. "Let me go! Let go!" Crack! The sound of bones crisscrossing could be heard. One of Tian's arms was broken by Gunan. He looked at the girl coldly. If not for the suspicion in his heart, her head would have been broken. Shadow power sealed Tian's mouth, preventing her from screaming in pain. She could only struggle with all her might. Lin Duo seemed to be agitated by her good friend's tragic state. She suddenly took a step forward and said, "Mr. Gunan, if you do this again, I'll send you back to the realm of martyrs." In a Morning Star plane, people believed that martyrs only came from two places, the continent itself or the boundless realm of martyrs outside the continent. Of course, there was no such thing as a realm of martyrs, but Lin Duo's threat to Gunan was real. Gunan glanced at her coldly and indifferently, and before he could speak, a voice had already resounded. "Ha ha ha! Martyrs, so you're a martyr." The ghost tree's figure had appeared behind Lin Duo at some point, his expression crazed. "If you kill her, you'll have to return to the realm of martyrs. You made me wait." The red-robed old man was now like an arrow at the end of its flight. The moon slave had consumed too much of his strength, and his injuries were rather severe. However, at this moment, he felt that all the waiting had been worth it. Gunan was actually a martyr. Yes, he was very good at running, and even his domain could not trap him. Taking revenge for his children had become an extravagant hope. But he was a martyr. Killing the martyr and sending him back to the realm of martyrs would make all his hard work go to waste. Was this not the best revenge? This was even more unbearable than killing him. Thoughts spun rapidly in his mind, but the ghost tree's hands did not stop moving. Countless branches fell towards Lin Duo in an instant. Linka was completely powerless to stop it. She could only watch helplessly as this scene unfolded. The sun and moon demons were already in front of Lin Duo, their faces filled with the determination to die. The purpose of their resurrection was to complete their ancestors' dying wish and resolve the calamity of the moon slave. Even if they died, they could not let their contractors die. However, at this moment, the shadow on Lin Duo's body suddenly began to boil. A black shadow stood up from the shadow, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into Gunan's appearance. It was the shadow body that he had always kept by Lin Duo's side, and it came into effect at this moment. This time, the branch pierced into Gunan's abdomen without any obstruction. "Mr. Gunan," Lin Duo looked at this scene in a daze and was momentarily speechless. The boundless vitality in Gunan's body had already made the ghost tree so excited that he was about to faint. As long as he sucked this guy dry, it was not impossible for him to step into that legendary realm. However, Gunan's face revealed a sinister smile, and the shadow sword suddenly appeared in his hand. This sword was very strange. Not only was its style different from usual, but it clearly looked like a large sword, and there was a faint white light on it. At the end of the day, the ghost tree was someone at the level of a Tao Lord. He faintly felt that something was wrong, but he could not see anything strange. However, a cold smile appeared on Gunan's face. What kind of mentality was a boss that had been depleted to the point where he dared to come in front of someone like me who had the skill to kill? Judgment of justice. In the name of justice, deal true damage based on the amount of life lost to the target. Gunan's expression became serious, and his entire body emitted the light of justice. The shadow sword in his hand also seemed to shine with a golden light. Of course, this was all an illusion. However, the effect of the skill would not be affected by the lack of a special effect. "Have a taste of my great sword," Gunan echoed in his mind. When the sword fell, it was as if the entire world was shaking. The golden light that descended from the sky instantly shattered the ghost tree. Gunan was completely unaware of this. For him, this was just a special effect of the skill. Lin Duo and the others stared blankly. They were so shocked that they could not even speak. Only a strange but sinister voice sounded behind Gunan. As expected of a master, you actually have such a secret skill. I wonder how many more times you can use it? Behind them, eldest baby had already disappeared. Only seventh baby, who had returned to his normal size, was left standing there with a cold expression. Chapter 148. It was Gu Xiaoyue's face. Gunan turned around slowly. He seemed surprised, but he also seemed to have expected it. His eyes were calm. The wounds on his body were healing slowly, but not quickly. This was because Gunan did not have the Dawn Sage robe. The Morningstar plane was not friendly to reincarnators. Due to the existence of reincarnation as a heroic spirit, reincarnators could not bring items with them. Therefore, very few reincarnators were willing to come here. Naturally, Gunan could not bring any good equipment with him. He could only rely on his skills. Apart from his core skill, Shadow Power, Gunan still had Passivation, Flash Strike, and Judgment of Justice. All three had extraordinary effects. However, Gu Xiaoyue was right about one thing. Judgment of Justice could not be used casually. Most of the players' skills in the Demon God game did not have cooldowns, but they were limited in other aspects. Passivation was a passive skill, Flash Strike consumed strength, and Judgment of Justice was a skills limitation. Judgment of Justice could only be used once on the same target. As an expert player, Gunan had already memorized the characteristics of each skill. He looked at seventh baby, or rather, the real Gu Xiaoyue. Is it the fruit's power that preserved your last bit of consciousness? Gunan looked at him and raised his eyebrows. Gu Xiaoyue was involved in the fusion with the king of moon slaves, and had even taken over seventh baby's role. This was the only possibility. Gu Xiaoyue's body was still making strange noises, as if some power was gathering in his body. Perhaps there was only coldness on his face. Have you ever thought that I would become like this, my lord? Gunan sneered, and the only response he got was a sword strike without hesitation. The sword easily cut Gu Xiaoyue open, but the latter did not seem to hear it. His body recovered in the blink of an eye. The real king of moon slaves has an almost indestructible body. Normal methods can't kill him. The moon demon shouted at Gunan. No matter how many evil deeds Gunan had committed in the past, the king of moon slaves was now his greatest enemy. Gunan rolled his eyes. Then tell me how to kill him. The coldness on Gu Xiaoyue's face deepened, but just as he was about to move, his expression began to twist again. Not only did the muscles on his face begin to move up and down, even his body began to twist in a strange manner. Gunan took the opportunity to attack him a few more times, but it was clearly useless. After a short moment, Gu Xiaoyue raised her head once more. Her eyes were blood red, and she didn't possess the slightest bit of rationality. Roar! Just like before, he pounced over like a monster. His speed and strength were not inferior to Gunan's. Therefore, Gunan performed a displacement, and his figure instantly turned into a shadow body. He was smashed into pieces by Gu Xiaoyue, while his real body appeared 100 meters away. Gu Xiaoyue broke through the shadow body, but he didn't continue to cause trouble for Gunan. He seemed to have gone mad and kept roaring at the sky. Lin Duo and the other two's faces were pale. Only Lin Ku was still somewhat clear-headed. She whispered to the other two, "Quick, let's go." She had long wanted to leave with her sister. If Lin Duo hadn't insisted on saving Tian, they wouldn't have ended up in this situation. However, the moment she opened her mouth, the crazed Gu Xiaoyue suddenly turned her head, and her scarlet eyes shone on Lin Ku. Lin Ku, who had her back to him, felt a chill run down her back. She felt like she had fallen into an ice cellar, and she couldn't say a word. The next moment, under Lin Duo's horrified gaze, Gu Xiaoyue instantly appeared behind Lin Ku, grabbed her body from behind, and bit down. Even with his average build, he opened his mouth that was half the size of a face and bit off half of Lin Ku's head. 2/3 of Lin Ku's face was directly torn off, and there seemed to be some confusion in the remaining half of her eyeball. Sis, sis. Lin Duo was completely dumbfounded. Her hands seemed to be trembling, or perhaps her entire body was trembling. Gu Zhaoyue had already completely lost his rationality. The bestial personality of Moonslave was currently in full control. He finished Lin Ke's corpse in a few mouthfuls and let out an excited cry again. Then, he opened his mouth and pounced at Lin Duo. Lin Duo! A cry of surprise rang out. It was Tian who suddenly rushed forward and pushed Lin Duo away. She shut her eyes tightly and stood in front of Gu Zhaoyue. The intense pain she imagined didn't come. She opened her eyes carefully and saw Gu Zhaoyue right in front of her face. His eyes still emitted a scarlet glow, but his expression seemed to be a little puzzled. He was sniffing with his nose, as if Tian was a delicious meal. Tian instantly felt her hair stand on end, but before she could move, Gu Zhaoyue's expression changed again. This time, it was a familiar expression from Tian. He raised his hand, touched his head, and smiled in a somewhat simple and honest manner. Even if he had changed his face, Tian could still clearly recognize that this was Elder Baby. Is it you? Tian asked in disbelief. She couldn't imagine that Elder Baby's hadn't disappeared after being torn apart and eaten. Elder Baby waved at her. The red glow in his eyes gradually disappeared, but a smile appeared on his face. Then he pointed behind Tian. Are you saying that we should hurry up and leave? After becoming the true queen of Moonslaves, Elder Baby's intelligence seemed to have increased a lot. He understood Tian's words and nodded. Tian was stunned for a while. Finally, she turned around and wanted to help Lin Duo up. Roar! Just as she turned around, Elder Baby's expression began to change again. The red glow in his eyes reappeared, and he bit down on Tian's neck again. Tian was so frightened that she didn't dare to move. When his fangs stopped right in front of her neck, all the hair on her body stood on end. She turned her head with difficulty, but saw that Elder Baby's face was sometimes ferocious, sometimes gentle, and sometimes simple and honest. Go! A simple word came out of his mouth, but before Tian could say anything, another figure appeared beside them. It was Gunan. Gunan pressed down on Elder Baby's head, and his sharp fangs instantly sank into Tian's body. Roar! Elder Baby roared angrily. Without even looking, Gunan threw a punch at Elder Baby's face, sending him flying. When he flew back, Tian was already clutching her neck and falling to the ground. The Moon Slave's infectious characteristics were madly corroding her body and soul. Elder Baby's personality finally gained the upper hand. He knelt on the ground with lifeless eyes and looked at Tian. Chapter 149. Tian Yuan's definition of a son of Moonslave was a person who could still maintain his sanity after being contaminated by a Moonslave. However, Gunan had proven through hundreds of experiments that the contamination must occur after death, so there was only one possibility left. There were people who could regain consciousness after being contaminated. From the moment he saw Elder Baby, Gunan had already guessed. Even the most superficial intelligence was still intelligence. Since Elder Baby had intelligence, what about the people he contaminated? Unfortunately, in Gunan's previous experiments, Elder Baby seemed to have lost his ability to contaminate. It was not until the fusion with the King of Moonslaves was completed and Gu Zhaoyue displayed her extraordinary intelligence that Gunan's hope was rekindled. On the other hand, he had long suspected Tian's existence. Professor Tian Yuan was a Moonslave, so Tian could not be his biological daughter. Then why would he adopt a human daughter? Gunan did not believe that it was a nonsensical reason, like hiding his identity. The most likely explanation was that Tian was a very important person. Tian Yuan had discovered her a long time ago and did not want her to fall into the hands of others, so he adopted her himself. Tian Yuan had long suspected the existence of a son of Moonslave. If Gunan knew about this, he would be even more certain of his judgment. When Gunan placed Tian in the lab and intentionally allowed Elder Baby to interact with her, He was even more certain of his guess. Tion's special constitution was probably just one of the simple things. She could make the king of moon slaves feel close to her. Gunan stood where he was. All his previous guesses flashed through his mind in an instant. His eyes were cold as he waited for the development of the situation. Elder Baby was hugging Tion's body and did not speak. After a while, just when Gunan was starting to get impatient and wondered if the king of moon slaves had also lost his ability to contaminate, Elder Baby finally moved. A drop of blood was squeezed out from between his brows and gently dripped onto the wound on Tion's neck. A strong heartbeat was heard. Tion's face quickly became rosy, but Elder Baby's face became extremely pale. After a while, Tion began to wake up. Her gaze was somewhat blank and bewildered, but it was obvious that she still retained her intelligence. Lin Duo finally regained some consciousness. She stared blankly at Tion and asked in confusion, Tion, how do you feel? Tion turned her head and looked at Lin Duo. She then looked down at her hands and said, I don't know. You've accepted the origin of the king of moon slaves, so you're now a moon slave? Sun monster, Xiao Ming suddenly said. I became a moon slave? Tion cried out in alarm. She had never expected that she would wake up and become a moon slave after falling asleep. Don't worry, the moon demon sighed softly. You possess the source of the moon slave king, so you can command the moon slaves on the mainland. So the root of the moon slave calamity lies in you. She then turned to look at Lin Duo. The ancestors said that the key to the moon slave calamity lies in the contractor. Is that what they meant? If it were not for the sake of saving Lin Duo, Tion would not have run to the king of moon slaves, and nothing would have happened. Can I? Tion was not confident. She turned to look at Elder Baby, but the latter only smiled weakly. Of course, the moon demon said decisively. As long as you can gather the moon slaves, or order them to stop attacking humans. Before she could finish her beautiful wish, a black longsword had already been thrust into Tion's forehead without hesitation. The scene fell silent. Lin Duo was stunned. The sun monsters and moon demons were stunned. An Elder Baby stared blankly at Gunan. Tion, who possessed the source of the moon slave, was humanity's last hope. Just like that, Gunan destroyed her life force. Main quest completed. Kill the son of moon slave. Side quest completed. Protect the twin heroic spirits, sun monster and moon demon. Dungeon main quest completed. Main quest rating, A. Side quest development. B. Map exploration. B. Sin rating. A. Overall rating. Accumulated points, 1,200. Accumulated sin rating, 115. The evil god's temple shook continuously, and a series of information flowed out. Everything was as Gunan had expected. Tion, who was given the source by the Moon Slave King, was the true son of Moon Slave. It was at this time that Gunan finally understood the gameplay of this dungeon. In fact, he did not have to do so many things. All he had to do was watch from the start, and the son of Moon Slave would naturally appear. The first time Gunan had interfered with the main quest was when he killed Tian Yuan. If Tian Yuan had not died, there would not have been an apocalypse, and the chaos on the mainland would have been controllable. The guiding moon fruits would have appeared as usual, and the person who obtained them would have been Tian Yuan. After Tian Yuan cultivated the Moon Slave King, he would naturally find a way to extract the source. He had even prepared Tian as a vessel. So how could he not do so? In fact, all Gunan needed to do was wait for the right time, and then kill Tian. Of course, this way his secondary development rate would be very low, and the sin rating would not be as high as 115. His total sin rating would reach 440 points. Whatever the case, this mission in the Morning Star Plane could be considered to have come to a successful conclusion. However, it was different from what the world had expected. If the world really had a will, it would have struck Gunan with a bolt of lightning long ago. As this was not a dungeon produced by the evil god's temple, but an external mission, Gunan could not return immediately. His body remained in the morning star plane. Well then, everyone, it's time for me to go. Gunan was in a good mood and bade farewell to Lin Duo and the rest. The sun and moon demons were speechless. The hope of saving the mainland had been destroyed in front of them, which meant that their mission could not be completed. This continent was destined to be plunged into misery and suffering. Humans would need at least decades to completely eradicate the moon slaves. Lin Duo, on the other hand, seemed to have matured after experiencing the death of her sister and the pain of losing her best friend. She stood up and said, "Little you said that her ancestor prophesied that the key to eliminating the disaster of the moon slaves lies with me. I understand now. If I had died here earlier, you would have disappeared long ago. Am I right?" Lin Duo's face no longer showed any signs of immaturity, only indescribable sorrow. In her heart, it was because she had summoned Gu Nan that she had caused the death of her sister and Tian Tian. She had even caused the world to fall into chaos and the arrival of the apocalypse. "So you want to kill yourself to expel me?" Gunan asked with interest. "No," Lin Duo said angrily. "You've already achieved your goal. Don't tell me you want to leave so easily. I'll definitely live well and let you." Gunan's sword pierced in her chest. In the next moment, as Lin Duo's life force was severed, Gunan's body began to fade away. Chapter 150. Planet Xianwang, White Mist's headquarters. When Gunan reappeared, it had been nearly half a month since he disappeared. He had not stayed in the Morningstar plane for long. It was only a short month, which was less than 3 days in the astral plane. However, after Gunan returned, he had to spend more time recuperating. This time, Gunan truly felt the damage that reincarnation did to his soul. The damage to his soul gave him a splitting headache, making it difficult for him to concentrate. Even eating sweets could not make up for it. No wonder there are very few solitary reincarnators after a certain level. Gunan could not help but sigh. The essence of reincarnation was to leave the body and enter another plane to possess others. When the soul was strong enough, it was inevitable that it would cause damage to the soul. According to White Misinformation, the degree of damage depended on 2 factors: the amount of soul invested and the time spent in the reincarnation plane. The higher the proportion of soul used for reincarnation, and the longer the time spent in the reincarnation plane, the more severe the damage. After the soul recovers, I need to rest for a period of time before I can carry out the next reincarnation. Maybe I should try some small planes. Although the benefits are small, I need to invest less soul power. With the White Mist mirror, I don't lack missions. Gunan adjusted his state and summarized the mission. Next, it was time to check his harvest. With Lan Si digesting the Godstone, his sin value had reached 445 points, not far from the 500-point mark. However, points were still a problem. Gunan now had 1,400 points, but to upgrade to grade 4 required 2,500 points. This meant that Gunan had to continue clearing dungeons. The blasphemy divinity could only provide him with sin value. Without points, he could not upgrade. Gunan slowly walked out of the hall. The star ring did not have any sunlight all year round, and there was only a gray night sky above his head. An unfamiliar girl was waiting outside the door, as if waiting for him to appear. As soon as she saw him, she bowed and said, "Lord Commander, the second commander asked you to see her after you come out." Gunan looked at her face and confirmed that she was not Redtail's clone. He nodded. In a quiet room, Gunan saw that Redtail was the same as before, but his face was more dignified. Originally, the Sand King and Redtail had jointly managed the affairs of White Mist. Now that the Sand King had been replaced by Gunan, the hands-off boss, the daily affairs naturally fell to Redtail. And this was exactly what she wanted. In this world, some people were infatuated with power, and some people were obsessed with power. It seems that Master's trip was very smooth. Redtail couldn't help but chuckle when he saw Gunan. Previously, Gunan had set aside a full month's time. Now that he had only spent half of that time, it was naturally smooth sailing. Gunan had no intention of explaining too much. He asked bluntly, "What's the situation over here? 5 of the 6 great Tao Masters are dead." The Providence experiment is completely in the hands of the divine oracle. Yi Chun, the so-called king of the northern region, is about to fight his way to the south. I wonder what the divine oracle wants to do. Red Tail said succinctly and then said, "But this is just a small matter. There is new news from the Alliance." The Alliance was naturally referring to the Blood Carrier Alliance. Red Tail used a strange tone and said, "His Highness, the Deep Sea King, seems to have returned." The Deep Sea King had once used Qin Xuanji to attack Gunan from afar. He was a level 4 elite who wanted to steal the Godstone. Big characters of this level usually did not stay in one place for long. Most of them were out doing their own things. The one who attacked Gunan from afar was probably just a part of the power he had left in the Central Galaxy. And now, this big shot had returned. Why would he return at this critical juncture? Even a fool would know that the importance this person placed on the godhood had far exceeded Gunnan's expectations. Gunnan could not help but frown. Why would a break-world elite of this world want a god's personality? He had no use for it. The god system was very exclusive. If he took the god's personality, he could only ignite the god fire or use it to desecrate it. There was no other use for it. Unless Gunnan thought of a possibility, but he did not say anything. He just looked at Red Tail. "I thought you would sell me out as soon as you heard the news." Gunnan and Red Tail did not have much of a relationship. They were just working together. If the risk of working together was too great, there was no need to continue working together. Red Tail laughed and said, "This is the 6th galaxy. It is not like the 9th galaxy is a backwater place. Even a break-world elite cannot simply do whatever they want. Those two are not in planet Xinhuang, but they do not like people to secretly do what they want. His Highness, the Deep Sea King's reputation." She did not say much, but she revealed a lot of information. The 6th galaxy had a break-world elite. Of course, their bodies were not there. That was why the secret Pathmaster and the others could do whatever they wanted. However, it was one thing for one's own people to play, but outsiders could not interfere. Gunnan nodded. He was still thinking. Even though there was a tall person above him, he was not stupid enough to think he was safe. If the Deep Sea King's real body came, he could kill him and leave. When those two came back, they would only pay a price in other ways. He would not start a fight because of his reputation. The only good thing was that the Deep Sea King could not do anything to him. Let's wait a little longer. As Gunnan thought, his eyes looked cold. When I reach level 4, I will go to the Blood Servant Alliance and kill a bunch of them. Gunnan thought to himself. His mentality was like, I have been chased by the police for 3 streets. When I level up and become Superman, the police station will blow up. If he wanted to level up, he still needed points. So, he could not stop reincarnating. He also had to start working on the White Mist. Leveling up from level 4 to level 5 was still a process of accumulating sin points and points. Gunnan needed a lot of world missions. How is the Shell Organization's plan going? Gunnan asked. The situation is not bad, but it will be more difficult in the future. Red Tail looked a bit helpless. The war between the North and the South has started. It is difficult for the organization to develop steadily. It's another son of luck. Gunnan's eyes revealed some interest. Lin Tian had given him a fog mirror. As the first child of luck to awaken, what about Yi Chun, the king of the North? His soul had recovered, but he still needed time to stabilize before he could reincarnate. It was good to take the net. As for whether the secret Pathmaster had a plan or not, what did that have to do with Gunnan? Tell me about the Shell Organization. Chapter 151. Gunnan sat alone in the Great Hall, holding a fog mirror in his hand. There was no longer any mist on the surface of the mirror, and there was even a small area emitting a faint light. This was the external feedback from the world's will, indicating that the mission had been completed. There is a large amount of detailed information in the white fog regarding reincarnation. After a period of research, Gunnan was no longer a beginner. Every plane had its own will, and these wills acted according to certain rules. When they discovered something that was not in harmony within the world, they would send requests to the outside world. These requests were captured through various methods and translated into missions, which were then completed through reincarnation. If one had the ability, They could directly break through the world. There were many ways to translate missions. For example, the white fog used luck, but there were also strange methods that relied on faith, resentment, or even living beings themselves. Once the world's request was completed, regardless of whether the translator completed it personally or not, the feedback would come to him. Gunan placed his hand gently on the fog mirror, and an indescribable aura gradually appeared. Before Gunan's eyes, everything he had done in the Morningstar plane was displayed bit by bit, all the way until Tion became the child of Moon's slave and was killed by him. The so-called worlds really doesn't have a consciousness. Gunan silently ridiculed. If the Plainsville was human, it would have long since chased him out after seeing everything he had done in the Morningstar plane. Would it even reward him? The aura of the plane spread along Gunan's hand, reaching his brain in the blink of an eye and attempting to enter his soul. At this moment, the evil god's temple shook again, and a message was released. Importing external instance dungeon. Creating new personal instance dungeon. Incomplete. Please name it. When Gunan finished reading the message and realized what was going on, he almost blurted out, "What the F***CK?" He had countless thoughts running through his mind. It was actually a personal instance dungeon. Why would a personal instance dungeon appear at this time? What was a personal instance dungeon? Personal instance dungeon was a gaming term. If it was an old player who had immersed himself in the evil god game for many years, he would definitely tell you the answer with 2 words: Divine Kingdom. Throughout the Tier 5 phase, players needed to establish individual dungeons and turn them into physical existences. Of course, they could also do the opposite. They could find a dungeon and privatize it, turning it into a personal dungeon that players could control at will. Completing any of the above conditions would be considered as establishing a divine nation and stepping into the ranks of the Sixth Order. Previously, Gunan had always been thinking about the immortal and demon world, and he had intended to use the latter method to turn it into his own personal instance dungeon. But now, the evil divine temple was telling him that there was already a private instance dungeon. Gunan's current mood was like an account that had just opened up a skill tree. He had just clicked on the first 2 rows when the ultimate skill at the top appeared. Hey, I don't even have a prerequisite skill. How am I supposed to light it up? However, in the end, Gunan was someone who had weathered through great storms and waves. He quickly calmed down. Forget about stepping into the 6th grade. He wanted to turn the private instance dungeon into an actual existence. In the message, there was clearly the word incomplete. His consciousness quickly sank into the evil god's temple. On the virtual light board in front of him, there was already a personal dungeon column. There was only one lonely dungeon on it, waiting to be named. Name it Morningstar. In order to make it easier to remember, Gunan directly gave the original realm's name. The dungeon's name quickly changed to Morningstar. At the same time, there was a word behind it: 30%. It's already 30% complete? Gunan stroked his chin, but his mind was racing. There is only one way to create a private instance dungeon or privatize an instance dungeon in the game: using the rules of one's own construction to replace the rules of the realm itself. When the players reached the 5th grade, all the instance dungeons would have a progress bar. The players would control the rules of the realm, and when the progress bar reached above 80%, they would attempt to make the instance dungeon private. But now it seemed different. Gunan had not even reached the 4th grade. He had not constructed the rules at all, so what progress bar was there to talk about? No, the essence of replacing the rules is actually to occupy the world's origin. Could it be that when the world's origin returned, it was directly swallowed by the evil god's temple? The more Gunan thought about it, the more he felt that the possibility was high. Others comprehended the world's origin in order to perfect their own laws, but he had even eaten the origin. The easiest way to verify this is to translate some small world missions and let others complete them. I can't even open a 30% Morningstar instance dungeon. If it's a small world, it might even eat up the origin in one go. Gunan's eyes shone with excitement. The use of a private instance dungeon was not only to establish a divine kingdom, but also to fill the gap in his points. Why are you back again? Redtail looked at Gunan strangely. Didn't this person say he was going to find Lon C to help her deal with the King of the North? Did anyone complete the world mission I gave you last time? Gunan asked impatiently. Not yet. Redtail shook her head. Most of the people in our organization are good at making fog mirrors and collecting materials. Those who are good at completing missions are all treasures. How can it be found so easily? Translation was precious, but once one had it, it was an ordinary item. The difficulty of executing it was not high at all. On the contrary, people who knew how to complete missions were incomparably precious in any reincarnation organization. Most of them worked for large organizations. Seeing Gunan's expression, Redtail could not help but laugh. I've received a lot of feedback from the Origin over the years, so the effects are much weaker. I've already given them priority to complete the mission you translated. Redtail did not doubt Gunan's eagerness. After all, she was very clear about how helpful the world's Origin was to a Dowlord. When she'd first received feedback from the Origin, her performance had not been much better. Hence, she advised him again, many missions are unique and cannot be attempted multiple times. That's why the members are relatively cautious. From understanding the mission information to preparing the materials and choosing the time to enter, it all takes time. Redtail had been a mission executor back then, and her results had been rather outstanding. She was very clear about this process. So, I advise you to get rid of Yi-chan first, and then capture a Child of Providence. That way, there will be more missions for you to choose from. However, Gunan waved his hand. Call all the people in the organization who are responsible for carrying out missions. I'll teach them how to do it. Redtail looked at him in shock. Gunan looked back at her without hesitation and pointed at himself. Chapter 152. Chu Kong was an agent in the White Fog. He was a member in charge of completing world missions, just like Gunan and the others had done in the Tower of Minglan. But today, Chu Kong was very annoyed. In the batch of missions issued by the organization half a month ago, there was a mission with a reward that he coveted. It was not difficult. He had been preparing for a long time and was about to start work, but he was asked to put down everything he was doing. What could a group of agents like them do? There must be other missions to do. The layman is guiding the expert. Chu Kong muttered unhappily, but he had to do as he was told. After all, the layman was the leader. When he arrived at the meeting place, Chu Kong was still full of impatience. He just wanted to finish up as soon as possible and go back to prepare for his mission. But when he was about to push the door open, an acquaintance rushed out from inside. Guan, you were called here too? Chu Kong said in surprise, as if he should not be here. The person in front of him was called Guan Sheng, also one of the agents in White Mist, but he was much more famous than Chu Kong. He was an ace agent. If not for their personal relationship, Chu Kong would not even be able to talk to him. But now, Guan Sheng looked like he was in a hurry. He just smiled and greeted Chu Kong, and the words, "I have something to do, so I'll leave first," were written on his face. Chu Kong was used to this. Guan Sheng was usually a mission maniac and was not interested in anything else. Now that he was called over for no reason, it was most likely that he was impatient and wanted to leave. But he did not expect that when Guan Sheng left, he would see him empty-handed. He hesitated for a moment and said, "You usually receive difficult missions, right? It's best to bring the information here." "Oh, right. Only the batch from half a month ago." After saying this, Guan Sheng left in a hurry, leaving Chu Kong baffled. Could it be that if he brought the mission information, he could solve it here? Chu Kong shook his head and pushed the door open, but what he saw was quite a bizarre scene. A young man in a white robe was sitting in the main seat, talking incessantly and writing something on the wooden board behind him from time to time. When Chu Kong came in, he was writing on a piece of wood and changing it into a new one, but the new one was respectfully received by someone next to him. When Chu Kong saw the faces of the people around him, his eyes almost popped out. That was the head of their missions department, old Mr. Zhua Chuan Yuan. Old Mr. Zhua was one of the elders of White Mist and a blood descendant from the Central Starfield. Not only was he powerful, but he was also an absolute authority when it came to executing missions. If it wasn't for the fact that there weren't many reincarnation organizations for Bloodkin, elders would have been condescending by staying in the White Mist. But it was this old man who took the wooden board full of words and looked left and right as if he was afraid that it would be snatched away. Elders Wa. Chu Kong quickly stepped forward to greet him. Everyone present was from the task division. Naturally, they had to greet their boss first. This is Elders Wa only nodded when he saw him. You're here. Take a seat first. Listen carefully and learn well. After saying this, he went back to studying the plank. Chu Kong was startled, and when he saw that the people around him also had similar expressions, he could only sit down patiently. After Chu Kong sat down, he heard the white-robed young man on the main seat say, "Next, White Bird City State, whose mission is this?" As soon as he finished speaking, the door was pushed open with a bang, and the person who came said, "Mine. Sir, that's my mission." Chu Kong looked over there, dumbfounded. Guan Sheng had already rushed back, and his forehead was still sweating. As Guan Sheng spoke, he quickly handed the information in his hand to the white-robed young man, as if he was very glad that he had made it in time. Chu Kong had some understanding of the mission of White Bird City State. The mission was located in a small plain, but there was a powerhouse at the Eternal Domain realm. The target was to kill the son of a member of parliament in White Bird City State. The investigators sent by the organization reported that the member of parliament was very protective of his son. The target's specific identity couldn't be determined. They only knew the school he studied at and some other basic information. According to the investigators' investigation, there were currently as many as 21 suspected targets. In order to ensure that the mission wouldn't be triggered, the investigator didn't dare to investigate further and could only report back. Plan: ask the agent to secretly investigate the background of the suspected target. You can also start from a member of parliament himself. If there is any information about his identity, please contact the headquarters at any time. After the white-robed young man finished reading the information, he read the plan given by the missions department again. In the absence of specific information, the missions department could only choose to deal with it this way. This plan was personally reviewed by Chu Kong, and he felt that he didn't make any mistakes. However, the young man's next words almost made him fly into a rage. Who made this plan? What's the use of investigating the member of parliament? Can't they just go to the target's door and kill him? The young man casually threw the file on the table and said disdainfully. Chu Kong glared. He really wanted to stand up and question the other party. Do you understand? Did you read the information carefully? As long as something happened to one of the 21 suspected targets, the target would definitely be strictly protected. Moreover, even if you were lucky enough to find the target, who dared to say that the target was unprotected? Most world missions had a time limit. After all, the plane of reincarnation was a real world, and it was also moving along a fixed path. If a suitable entry point was not found, it was very likely that the mission would directly fail. Chu Kong already had a sneer on his face. This was obviously an outsider. Based on his many years of experience in carrying out missions, it was obvious that the member of parliament was the key. If they found enough clues on him to confirm the target's true identity, they would be able to kill him in one strike. And in the process, they might also encounter false information. It would depend on whether the agent had the ability to distinguish between them. However, this wasn't his mission, so Chu Kong could only suppress his anger. Others might not say anything, but he believed that Guan Sheng definitely wouldn't. As expected, Guan Sheng stood up. However, his attitude was so polite that Chu Kong thought he had recognized the wrong person. There are 21 suspected targets. How do we confirm which one is the target? Guan Sheng bowed slightly, like a primary school student asking a teacher. The young man said matter-of-factly, "There's no need to confirm. Can't we just kill them all? Take a closer look at the information of these 21 people. 16 are students of the same high school, 4 are teachers of this high school, and only 1 is unemployed. When you reincarnate, bring enough high explosives with you. Find that homeless person first, bring him to the high school, and then place the explosives on him to detonate." The young man knocked on the table and returned the file to Guan Sheng. It doesn't matter how many people protect the target, as long as there are enough explosives. Chapter 153. When Chu Kong came out of the conference room, he was still in a daze. It's already nighttime. He looked up at the sky, his mind still not clear. He then said to himself, "Oh, there's no day in the celestial ring." Chu Kang cannot be blamed. Anyone who had experienced a whole day of mental torture would feel the same way. It was like a champion of the Olympiad who listened to an internationally renowned master's lecture for a whole day. He was completely defeated in the field he was most proud of. "Guansheng, are we dreaming?" Chu Kang patted Guansheng's shoulder. "Why do I feel like the mission has suddenly become easier?" Guansheng's situation was better than his. At least he was still conscious. He sighed and said, "I don't know who that person is and whether he will come again in the future. Forget it. Let's finish these missions first." Guansheng, the mission maniac, took a book of missions and left excitedly. Chu Kang looked down at the small book in his hand. It was also filled with how to deal with the missions. When he thought of that ridiculously young face, his heart was still full of disbelief. When Gunan returned to the hall, he really felt a little tired. Even though those missions didn't seem difficult to him, finishing so many missions in a day would still make him feel mentally and physically exhausted. But if his guess was correct, then the price he had to pay would be worth it. Small planes often had a faster time flow, so the time needed to complete the missions was not long in the astral world. Gunan took out the fog mirror again. There were already many light dots on it. Those were the small missions that had been completed. Importing external dungeon. Creating a new personal dungeon. Incomplete. Please name it. Importing external dungeon. Creating a new personal dungeon. Incomplete. Please name it. Importing external dungeon. Creating a new personal dungeon. Completed. Please name it. Importing external dungeon. After importing the world's origin, a series of prompts appeared in the evil god's temple. This time, there were more than 10 missions, but in the end, only one succeeded in creating a personal dungeon. One was enough. Gunan was slightly happy. He quickly opened the dungeon interface to see if the private dungeon mentioned here was the same as what he remembered. In the instance dungeon interface, among the row of incomplete instance dungeons that were still gray in color, the word completed was particularly eye-catching. Private instance dungeon, unnamed, established instance dungeon, initial members, for instance dungeon reset period, 3 days. In the game in his previous life, private instance dungeons were a very interesting way to play. The interaction between different players was basically completed through this way. Private dungeons could be divided into 2 types, autonomous and established, according to the difference between players who built them on their own initiative and those who took them from outside. Independent dungeons were used by players to level up. If players wished to reach Tier 6 and complete their first-class promotion, relying on independent dungeons was the best method. Although an established instance dungeon could also be turned into a private one, its greatest use was not for that. Instead, it was for grinding points. Of course, instance dungeons were meant to be farmed over and over again. Private instance dungeons could not earn any sin points, but they could earn a certain amount of sin points. Once a dungeon was opened, players could choose to enter the dungeon and complete the quest together with their NPC companions. They could also bring other online players with them. Of course, there were no online players in this world. If Gunan opened the dungeon, how would he choose his companions? In the original game, in order to increase the randomness, NPC companions were randomly selected from all over the world. It could be a dungeon character that players were familiar with, or it could be a completely fictional character. Gunan did not have time to think too much about it. He would know once he opened the dungeon. However, at this moment, the main door of the hall was suddenly pushed open, and Redtail rushed in. Gunan's consciousness quickly withdrew from the evil god's temple. He slowly opened his eyes on the throne and looked at Redtail with a somewhat unfriendly gaze. Redtail noticed this and said without hesitation, "My lord, Lanxi is seriously injured. Xianhuang Continent, Tang family." Tang Xian stood anxiously outside the door, waiting for the situation inside the house. "My lady, you have been wandering around here for 20 times. Can you stop for a while?" Beside her, a young man in black said. His tone revealed a sense of leisure, in sharp contrast to Tang Xian's anxiety. "What do you know?" Tang Xian glared at him fiercely. "If something really goes wrong, you'd better prepare for your funeral." Oh, it's not that scary. The young man pretended to be afraid, obviously not taking it seriously. After a pause, seeing that Tang Xian did not speak, he continued, "It was that woman named Lan Si who came here on her own. We didn't invite her here. How can you blame us? No matter how powerful the people behind her are, they have to be reasonable, right? This time, we are helping the Merchant Alliance." The young man spoke indifferently, and his heart was filled with disdain. His name was Tang Zichuan, and he was the leader of the younger generation of the Tang family. He had traveled with the family's caravan to several star fields. Whether it was his vision or strength, he was far above ordinary people. Unlike Tang Xian, who grew up freely, Tang Zichuan not only broke through the transcendent realm early, but also had many adventures. He was a descendant of the Tang family. He had just returned to the Xianhuang planet and had not experienced the farce of the Tang family before, so he did not take this matter to heart. In his opinion, this was really not a big deal. It was too common for several parties to compete for resources, and when it came to fighting, others would not stop just because of her background. This woman named Lan Si, wasn't she just the leader of a small organization that had just been established and wanted to follow behind the family to get some soup? Why did she have to hang on to the name of cooperation? She didn't even see if they had the qualifications. When she first came on the stage, she seemed to have some skills, but it didn't take long for her to be exposed. It turned out that she was a rookie with no combat experience. Tang Zichuan, who had been on the battlefield for a long time, despised this kind of greenhouse flower the most. Naturally, he would not be polite with his words. After a few casual words, Lan Si really took the bait, and as a result, she was seriously injured in the chaotic battle. The two were still talking when the door opened. A doctor came out and shook his head gently at Tang Xian. "We did our best. Whether she can wake up or not, it's up to God's will." Depending on God's will meant that there was no hope for her. Tang Xian was stunned. Just as she was about to speak, someone else came to report. "Eldest Miss, 2 people have come to visit, saying they are your friends." Chapter 154. Gunan stood in the Tang family's main hall, feeling a little strange. The matter of Lan Si being seriously injured was indeed beyond his expectations. Or rather, he had never thought that there would be an NPC who would court death to the point of seeking it himself. But thinking about it carefully, Lan Si was indeed such a person. During the battle in 66 Amaterasu, if it wasn't for her brother, she might have died at the hands of Qin Xuanji. Gunan laughed and shook his head. Fortunately, she had the God Stone. As a carrier of the God Stone, she couldn't even commit suicide, let alone be beaten to death. Being seriously injured this time might be beneficial. "Where is she?" Gunan asked casually. Tang Xian, who was standing in front of him, smiled bitterly. She knew what Gunan had done in the Tang family. Now that something had happened to Lan Si, it was hard to say what Gunan would do. "She's not in good condition," the doctor said. "It's okay, she won't die," Gunan said with a wave of his hand. Tang Zichuan, who was following behind Tang Xian, sneered when he saw Gunan's confident look, but he didn't say anything. A moment later, Gunan stood in front of Lan Si's bed. She was lying there with a pale face, and even her breathing was very weak. "The God Stone hasn't been triggered? It's because the injury isn't serious enough." Gunan only needed one glance to know the reason why Lan Si was unconscious. Her brain was injured so badly that she couldn't wake up, but the injury itself wasn't serious, so the divine spark didn't actively protect her. In the words of the game, Lan Si had suffered a crowd control, but his HP hadn't dropped much. But in reality, even if it wasn't a serious injury, once it hit a vital part, it would be enough to cause serious consequences. Tang Xian looked at his silent expression and couldn't help but say, "She's just unconscious. Why don't—" "It's okay," Gunan said softly, and then a small black sword appeared in his hand. Pucci. The small sword entered Lan Si's heart, and blood spurted out. Tang Xian, Tang Zichuan, and Redtail, who came with him, were dumbfounded. Even if he expected Gunan to be able to cure Lan Si's Redtail, he did not expect it to be such a method. The next moment, a golden light shone from between Lan Si's eyebrows, and an indescribably noble aura flashed past. The wounds on her body had already healed. She'll wake up in a while. Gunan looked at Redtail. How is she? There are traces of the power of Providence, Redtail said with a sullen face. Ever since Gunan heard about Lan Si's situation in the main hall, he had first understood the situation. It was easy to explain. Lan Si was ordered to establish the shell organization Blue Water Lake. She, who had never had the experience of being a leader, could only seek help from Redtail and the others while cooperating with others to develop the organization. She had no foundation on the mysterious yellow star, so naturally, she was in the dark. In the end, she could only find the Tang family. At least she knew them. The Tang family knew that Gunan was behind Lan Si, so they were very willing to help, but the result of the cooperation was not very good. But what made Gunan feel the most strange about this whole incident was the person who had injured Lan Si. This person was called Yi Long, born in the northern region. He was the younger brother of Yi Chun, the king of the northern region, and also one of the famous sons of Providence on the continent. A son of Providence, like him, would not easily connect with other experts. Once there was a connection, it must be the guidance of the power of Providence. As the original user of the power of Providence, the White Mist organization was well aware of this. For example, the grudge between Gunan and Lin Tian was caused by Fu Jing, so the power of Providence naturally affected Gunan. No other lines of Providence were found. Providence descended directly on her. It was the divine design who took action, Redtail said expressionlessly. Good. Gunan sneered. He did not kill the divine design sect master directly, but he did not expect that he would dare to come out again. After a pause, Gunan said, You can put away the net of the mysterious yellow star and start hunting the sons of Providence. That Yi Chun, can you deal with him? No problem. This is what we are good at. Redtail smiled lightly. The divine design sect, the White Mist translation method, was completed by collecting Providence. Naturally, they had studied many ways to deal with the sons of Providence. Unlike the 6 Tao masters who were half-baked, they only learned to set up the net, but they did not learn how to close it, so they ended up being unable to control it. The two of them talked as if there was no one else around, as if Tang Xian and Tang Zichuan next to them did not exist. Tang Xian had long been used to Gunan's bad character, but Tang Zichuan's eyes were slightly gloomy, and he said in a deep voice, Are you talking about the king of the northern region, Yi Chun? Just yesterday, another 3 Tao lords perished at his hands. Ever since Yi Chun had become a Tao master, he had spent decades recuperating and building up the northern region like an iron bucket. Now, he was finally on the path of expansion. His move was like a thunderbolt. In an extremely short period of time, the northern region army attacked cities and occupied territories everywhere. Lan Sihui was injured by Yi Long because she was fighting for a resource. In response to Tang Zichuan's words, Redtail only glanced at him indifferently, then smiled and said nothing. Gunan completely ignored him. I'll leave this to you. When she wakes up, ask her to go back to the organization and cultivate. I'll go talk to the Divine Design sect. After leaving such a sentence, Gunan's figure instantly disappeared. Ever since he had the private dungeon, Gunan was actually not very willing to waste time on the mysterious yellow star. He had always done things for points and sim points. At most, he would temporarily gain the attention of a 4th-grade powerhouse, so he needed to be a little more careful. Reincarnation was in a cool-down state. Lan Sihui was constantly providing sim points while he relied on the private dungeon for points. Knowing that the Deep Sea King had returned, coupled with this incident, Gunan decided to let Lan Sihui hide first. Even the Divine Design sect had noticed Lan Sihui, who dared to say that the Deep Sea King would not. If Lan Sihui was captured by the Deep Sea King before he rose to 4th grade, it would be a great loss. With that thought in mind, Gunan had already arrived in front of the Divine Design Dojo. This time, he did not use Starship, but directly came up with his own strength. Therefore, as soon as he arrived at the door, someone immediately came to stop him. Who are you? If you wish to enter the Divine Design Dojo, please state your name. The black light of the shadow, sword flashed, and the bodies of several guards were cut in half. However, Gunan's gaze did not even change. He controlled the white mist, so naturally, he knew that the arrangement of providence needed the support of a force. It would be very troublesome to control it alone. Therefore, even if he could not kill the divine design this time, he had to annihilate the dojo. Only the divine design was left alone, so naturally, there was no way he could interfere with the providence. Gunan walked slowly into the dojo. When he passed by their corpses, he even made a not very funny joke. Chapter 155. Blood dyed the star ring, and corpses littered the ground. Gunan was alone with his sword, but that wasn't quite right. In reality, there were dozens of shadow bodies moving at the same time, wantonly slaughtering all the living people they could see. Whether it was the disciples of the Tianji dojo or the cultivators who came to inquire about the Tianji, none of them could escape death. Even if the latter group of people were actually innocent, what did it matter? Gunan didn't have the time to distinguish who deserved to die and who was innocent. He would only use the most efficient method to deal with things. As for things like morality, it didn't apply to players. Who exactly are you? What grudge does my Tianji dojo have with you? A person who looked like a manager struggled to get up after being struck by the sword. Where is the Tianji dojo? Gunan asked expressionlessly. The manager revealed a cold smile. The dojo master has calculated everything in the world. How would it be found by you? Gunan nodded, expressing his agreement with the manager's words. Then, he chopped off the manager's head. Gunan wasn't a Shinibu who advocated the whole world should listen to me. Others naturally had the right to not listen to him, but he also had the right to kill all those who didn't listen. The Tianji dojo master was able to escape because of his ability. It didn't stop Gunan from slaughtering his dojo. The monk could run, but the temple couldn't. The shadow body's slaughter continued. Occasionally, there would be a fish that escaped the net, but Gunan didn't care. He slowly walked into the Tianji dojo master study. Most of the books here had already been taken away. It seemed like the Tianji dojo master had expected this. This was also normal. Anyone who understood Gunan wouldn't be stupid enough to wait for death at home after making a move against Lan Si. He ran away on his own, leaving behind his disciples in the dojo to deceive others. How heartless! Gunan sighed at the Tianji dojo master's decisiveness. He didn't think that he was the one who acted as the executioner. The process of wiping out the heavenly secret dojo was nothing to write home about. There was not even the slightest bit of resistance, and the heavenly secret dojo lord had long since retreated. Did he spend so much effort to break through to the fourth rank? When Gunan was free, he would think about the purpose of the heavenly secret Tao Lord. This was most likely the reason. He didn't even want his dojo. What else could it be for? However, none of this had anything to do with Gunan. After locking Lan Si in a small black room and letting her cultivate properly, Gunan left the white fog and hid in a small city on the mainland, where he disguised himself as an ordinary scholar. The Deep Sea King had already returned to the astral world and could come looking for him at any time. After all, he was a Tier 4 existence, so he had to show some respect. The relationship between Gunan and the White Mist could not be hidden from those who were observant. Staying in the White Mist was tantamount to courting death. Private Instance Dungeon. After dealing with the aftermath, Gunan could finally calm down and study his Private Instance Dungeon. Out of the dozen or so Private Instance dungeons that he had developed in one go, only one had reached 100% progress and was displayed as completed. And this instance dungeon corresponded to a small plane called Splendid World. Splendid World was not a small plane. There is only one planet in the plane, and the local civilization was half technology and half special ability development. Even in the modern city that was like a steel forest, there were all kinds of special ability users, and they were the kind that were open to the public. Name it Splendid World and open the Private Instance Dungeon. Gunan ordered the interface. Immediately after, he found that his consciousness had returned to his body, and then his spirit began to be pulled out by itself. This process was very similar to the situation when he was reincarnated. However, this time his spirit did not go outside the plane, but to a strange space. A small ball of light separated from his spirit, and he could clearly see that it was the ball of light that represented Splendid World. And after his spirit released the ball of light, it turned into a small dot of light and slowly approached the ball of light. And what surprised Gunan even more was that in this strange space, there were countless balls of light and dots of light. As soon as Splendid World's ball of light appeared, it immediately attracted many dots of light. Around the ball of light, there were clearly 4 gaps for the dots of light to enter. Apart from the one that Gunan had firmly occupied, the other 3 had caused a scramble. Gunan looked at this scene in astonishment. This was something he had never seen in the game before. No, it should be said that he had seen a similar scene before. It was the scene of a tycoon player building a map and other casual players fighting to enter the instance dungeon. Could it be? The next moment, Gunan's consciousness appeared in an office in a building, and in front of him sat 3 people with faces full of joy. A woman, an old man, and a little boy. The woman was dressed like a beautiful urban woman, and there was thick eyeshadow on her face, but she did not give off a vulgar feeling and instead looked extremely charming. The old man's attire was slightly retro. He wore a pair of gold-rimmed glasses on his face, and he wore a double-breasted black suit, looking like an old scientist in a portrait. The little boy was a little boy, but his attire was the strangest one. He wore half a lady's sun hat on his head. The reason why it was half a hat was because the sun hat had been cut vertically in half, leaving only the left half, and the little boy was actually wearing it just like that. Looking at the 3 people with different appearances, Gunan coughed lightly and said, "How should I address the 3 of you?" The woman revealed a smile. "You can call me Purple Will, sir." The little boy also smiled. His smile was very strange, and the smiles on the left and right sides of his face were very uncoordinated, as if there were 2 people smiling. Zwa, that's what everyone calls me. The old man seemed to be the most familiar, and his attitude was also the lowest as he said, "I'm Chio-Wen-Ran, and I just became a Star-Lord 4,000 years ago. I dare not be mentioned in the same breath as the 2 seniors." Hearing this, Gunan couldn't help but raise his eyebrows, but he didn't reveal any other strange expression. He calmly said, "I'm Gunan." Purple Will and Zwa seemed to be rather famous people, and since the old man Chio-Wen-Ran had acknowledged himself as a junior, the task of communicating with Gunan naturally fell to him. "Sir Gunan, you're the master of this small world, right? I didn't know this place was." Chio-Wen-Ran spoke halfway, and then waved his hand. "Please don't misunderstand, sir. I was just asking casually." Gunan waved his hand, and then said, "This is the Splendid World." Chio-Wen-Ran and Zwa didn't react, but Purple Will said, "It's the Splendid World. I came here more than 600 years ago, and thought it wasn't bad back then. I didn't expect it to be taken away in the blink of an eye. The Splendid World is not bad," Zwa also said. Zwa also said at this moment. When he spoke, his 2 faces still had completely different expressions. Other than the cultivation limit being a little too low, leaving only the extraordinary level, everything else is not bad. Gunan watched the 3 of them communicate, and after some thought, he said, "Speaking of which, the 3 of you, so what's the situation now?" Hearing this, the 3 of them couldn't help but be stunned. In the end, it was Chio-Wen-Ran who said with a smile, "Sir, you must be someone who has immersed yourself in cultivation and already has the ability to take away a world. Could it be that this is your first time entering the All Heavens Star Path?" Gunan nodded, but didn't say anything. Chapter 156. Gunan was actually very familiar with the private instance dungeon. The Evil God game was a single-player game that allowed players to play online, and the private instance dungeon was the basis for players to play online. From grade 5 onwards, players began to have private instance dungeons. Players could use their own rules to modify the instance dungeon, and then put the modified products on the public platform for other players to conquer. Before this kind of instance dungeon was released, the player himself had to pass it once, and after the release, the player himself would not be able to obtain any rewards. The other was the random instance dungeon, in which the player took out the instance dungeon and handed it to the system for random modification. Even the player himself did not know what the modification would be. And what Gunan was facing now seemed to correspond to the random instance dungeon in the game. Gunan and the other three stood on the roof of the building, and there was a blood-red countdown in the air. There were only 30 seconds left. You're saying that the Heavenly Star Path will follow what I know and hear and create missions for the sub. Astral World? Gunan asked with a strange expression. That's right. Xiao nodded. Gunan turned his head and looked at the countdown, but his expression became more and more strange. After a simple conversation with Xiao and the other two, Gunan received too much information to the point that he could not fully process it. These three people were indeed Astral Lords, and they were real Astral Lords at grade 5 or even higher. According to Xiao, he had only become an Astral Lord for just 4,000 years and had not had the time to choose an Astral World. Purple Will and Zwizwa were both veteran experts of the Star Path, and they were real big shots. Astral Lords correspond to grade 5, and at grade 5, one has to find an instance dungeon to build a divine kingdom. This process is exactly the same as in the game. Gunan touched his chin and thought to himself. Under normal circumstances, he should have reached grade 5 and had a private instance dungeon before he could enter this place. But devouring the world source brought this step forward. Because of this, when he was still at the 3rd rank, he would have to face off against those at the 5th rank or even higher. Fortunately, according to Xiao, it was only a strand of consciousness that entered the Star Path, not even a soul, so Astral Lords could not really hurt the other party. Even if he killed his opponent, his body would be reconstructed by the laws in the blink of an eye, leaving him completely unharmed. Even the system of unlimited attempts in the dungeon has been retained. It really is similar. Gunan sighed softly. The countdown in the air was about to end. The Heavenly Star Path replaced the game system, and the Star Lord replaced the other players. Only Gunan was himself. If it was really built according to what I know. Gunan spoke at the last second. Please be mentally prepared, the three of you. This picture might be a little poisonous. The next moment, the countdown ended and the blood curtain suddenly descended. The entire sky turned blood red, and the originally noisy city suddenly fell silent. A line of words was written in the sky in blood. The first stage was to arrive at the destination. Victory condition. All 4 players must survive before the countdown ends. Power limit. 2nd order. Before Gunan could sigh the familiar words, an inexplicable power descended, and the strength of Gunan and the other 3 dropped instantly, all the way to 2nd order. Xiao and the other 2 were dumbfounded. It was not their first time entering the astral plane, but how could there be a mission with such a power limit? They might not know what 2nd order represented, but they were very clear that their physical strength was reduced to the innate realm. A mere innate realm couldn't even fly. While the 3 were still in a daze, Gunan had already shouted, "Go!" The 3 looked up instinctively, but saw that Gunan had already run to the edge of the platform, and then directly jumped out. This made them frown at the same time. This was the top floor of a building that was close to 100 meters tall. Normally, they wouldn't care, but now their strength was only at the innate realm. It was this moment of hesitation that made the blood curtain in the sky thicker. The next moment, a meteorite fell from the sky, directly hitting the top of the building. Gunan looked at the 3 people who were turned into ashes and shook his head helplessly. What the hell is going on? Meteorite? Who would have thought that there would be such a situation? What's wrong with the Star Path? This is clearly a trap. Still on the top of the building, the blood-red countdown was the same as before. Xiao roared indignantly, while Gunan stood at the side and yawned. It's just the starting point kill. What's so strange about it? You'll know after being tricked once. Gunan waved his hand and said, when you encounter the finishing point kill in the future, I'm afraid you'll go crazy. After all, he was an old monster who had lived for thousands of years. After venting his anger, Xiao calmed down and apologized to the 3 embarrassedly. Zwizwa and Zi exchanged glances, then looked at Gunan at the same time. We aren't the world controllers. Although we don't fear death, our consciousness can only stay in the Star Path for a limited time. Who was dressed in purple, said with a smile. So, if you have any suggestions for the astral world mission, why don't you tell us? We'll discuss it together. This was Zwa speaking. The left and right sides of his body were clearly separated. Even when he spoke, his mouth moved up and down differently. However, his voice was very normal, like that of an ordinary child. It looked very strange. Gunan frowned slightly, but he didn't refuse. Since the four of them were teammates, they had common interests. There was indeed no need to hide anything. Right now, other than the starting point kill, we don't know anything else. We can only test it slowly. But from the goal of the first stage, this stage should be parkour. Parkour? Chiu and Ran clearly didn't understand what these three words meant. It requires us to reach our destination, and there will be a series of obstacles and even enemies on the way. After saying this, Gunan immediately said, "You'll understand what parkour means after a few rounds. Let's talk about the starting point kill first." Starting point kill was also a new term, but it was much easier to understand. The meteorite fell too fast. Other than jumping, there's no other way. In the end, we're still too weak, Ze said with a frown. She didn't say it out loud, but the others understood. Jumping off the building and landing from a height of more than 100 meters would seriously injure them, even if they didn't die. How were they going to continue with the mission? At the end of the day, with their identities, they really weren't used to thinking about problems with the innate level. All the methods they could use in the past were suddenly useless. It was like a super hacker returning to primitive society. No matter how good his skills were, there was nothing he could do. With the power of the innate level, if you want to survive falling from a height of 100 meters, you'll need to be a cultivator who specializes in the physical cultivation system, Chiu and Ran said with a serious expression.